And now, it's that time of the week once again. Welcome to the Departure Lounge podcast with your hosts, Tom Whittle and Steve Woldridge. Your ticket to the home of aviation podcasts. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode number 56 of the Departure Lounge Departure Lounge podcast on the Departure Lounge YouTube channel. It's always a mouthful. But yes, good evening to everybody. I am your host for this evening, Tom Whittle. Hope you are doing well this evening. And of course, joining me as per normal is our wonderful co-host for the evening and of course the podcast. It is Steve Woldridge. Steve, a very good evening to you on this Wednesday. How are you?
Yep. Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone at home. I'm delighted to be back after not being very well last week. It was a very good show. I still managed to watch it from my sick bed, and it was very enjoyable. So yeah, I'm pleased to be back, and I'm looking forward to tonight. What about yourself? You all good?
Doing all right. Yeah, not too bad. I've had a busy sort of week so far with my brand new job. It's very tiring.
Yeah.
Yeah, so things are definitely on the up. So so I'm good. I'm all good. Yeah, I'm all good.
Good. I'm delighted to hear it. Yeah, it's good that you're back in work, obviously, especially sort of this day and age.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah,
congratulations.
Absolutely. Apart from all that, your week's been all right?
Yeah, not too bad. I've been sort of just taking things a little bit easy. I've sort of almost recovered, probably 80-90%. So I've not been doing anything too crazy or out of the ordinary. Just watching a bit of TV and catching up on YouTube channels and whatever. So
and why not?
It's been good. Yeah, nice and relaxed.
Wonderful.
Save myself for the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll bring you back shortly.
Yeah.
Also joining us this evening is the resident contributor to the show. It is, of course, Ian Hartley. Ian, a very good evening to you. I take it Preston is still in one piece after the derby with Blackpool last night.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was a fantastic result there for Preston last night against Derby. There were only 6 people arrested, which can't be a bad thing for a Preston.
And that's
Derby
the fantastic result.
That's a good result. Yeah, only 6 people arrested. Unfortunately, the Blackpool keeper's not so good.
No.
Hope he gets better soon. Got a bad knock in the first 10 minutes or so. And a couple of, I'm not going to go into it, but a couple of voices injured as well with some idiots throwing stuff at them. So, yeah, but apart from that, all good.
That's fair enough. So apart from obviously talking about that, how are you and how's your week been?
Yeah, absolutely fine. I've not really done much this week, to be honest. I think the weather's against me this week. I did a bit of fishing yesterday, but I'm not going to go into that too much. And I wanted to go out again for the rest of the week, but it's going to be blowing a hoolie, isn't it, over the next couple of days? So particularly tonight and tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I was quite surprised, to be honest. We seem to be going back into winter. So apart from that, all good.
It's all good so far, but wonderful. We'll bring you back shortly.
Thank you.
And of course, the moment that I've been looking forward to. She was on episode 3 many months ago. And she's wonderfully agreed to come back. We've been looking forward to this. But it is, of course, our guest for this evening. It is, of course, former British Airways 747-400 Captain Cat Burton. Cat, very good evening to you. Welcome back to the show. Brand new format, of course. It was different to how we did it last time. But how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Tom. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Not a problem. I'd certainly enjoyed the last time that we had a chat, and we spoke off air again, and things are very different now. So hopefully it'll be a bit sort of less chaotic this time round. Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic to have you back. Firstly, how have you been?
Well, I think pretty much all of us have been grounded by COVID for some time. My company furloughed me for about 12 months, but we're back flying now and back teaching people to fly, mostly doing their CPL training at the moment.
Yeah.
Also doing their multi-engine instrument rating, their multi-engine piston, and everything down to and including trial lessons for potential new pilots.
Yeah.
Still
Fantastic.
enjoying my flying.
That's the main thing. That's the main thing. But we'll get on to everything shortly. We'll just bring everybody in so we can all say hello to one another. There we go. Everyone say hello.
Hey, Cat, you all right?
I'm very well, thanks, Steve. How are you?
Very well, yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Oh,
Bit
it's Ian
croaky,
there.
actually.
That's Ian, yeah.
No, I got the wave from Steve.
Yeah,
No, that's
yeah, no,
absolutely
absolutely, absolute privilege that you've joined us again this
Oh, no,
evening. Like, thank you ever so much for it.
No, not at all. The pleasure and the privilege are all mine.
fantastic. Wonderful. Right, so a couple things that we'll go over before we jump into the show. If you have any questions for Cat Burton, do get them into the chat. We'll get them read out as the show goes on. Also, because according to my schedule that we have towards the end of the month, and I wanted to kind of get this out of the way very quickly, towards the end of the month, we're doing a viewer's choice in terms of what we talk about. So we're going to ask the viewers to suggest lots of topics that they want us to talk about. So I went and spent 5 of my hard-earned pounds rather, on the lovely spinny wheel of destiny. So I'm just going to spin it around this way. Hold on. There we go. So the lovely spinny wheel of destiny. I'd like someone to come up with a really cool name for it. But any suggestions that anybody has for a viewer's choice show at the end of the month will go onto this board.
I'd call it Condor, me, because of the colour scheme.
Don't get me started. Do not get me started on that. But anybody that's got any suggestions that are worthy talking about, get them through to us, and then we can get them onto the wheel, and we'll get it spun, and then all good. That's that out of the way. Moving on from that. To do some housekeeping, we're on social medias. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course Twitch if you fancy it. Also, you can also find our shop that we have, which you can find in also there's a description below if you want to buy your merchandise to support the channel. I'm just going to twist that background. There we go. Also, if you wish to be a guest on the show, do message us on any of the social medias, and we will get you onto the show as soon as we can. We have a huge schedule at the moment, judging by what I can see on my whiteboard. So we'll definitely fit you in as soon as we can. With that out of the way, I'm just going to keep twisting that, get that back there because I've messed that right up. So let's go through some hellos before we jump in. So Ian, if you'd like to have the wonderful duty of going through the hellos.
Yeah, I'll just go through the names of the people who are in the chat. I think that's going to be the easiest thing to do. So everyone's saying hello to everybody else. Everyone's saying hello, and we're saying hello back to everybody, and that's including, we've got Jack Rolls, Sarah Pass, Darren Graham, photography. Good evening, everyone, from a wet and windy Heathrow. Visions International's listening. Sarah Pass as well, and Northern Laddie saying hi to everyone. And just to answer his question, I do carry a fishing license with me everywhere I go. Though he's a voluntary bailiff, so I need my license when he's about. We've got Jim Gemmell watching as well. Northern Lad, Jack Rolls again, Clive Eversley, Henry Fox. I think that's come from Cat's Facebook page. That
I believe it has. Yes.
Right. So yeah, that's pretty.
Hi,
pretty
Henry.
cool that they're actually showing up on here as well.
Mm.
So Northern Lad's asking you, Tom, as well. What's your new job?
So very quickly, my new job is I'm in the removals business. So it's hard work, but it's definitely a lot of fun. So that's my new job.
Transatlantic Allison, hi guys. I'd love to stay, but she's sat in traffic on the M62 on her way to Manchester.
Oh, wonderful!
Fantastic. There's not a better motorway to be sat on up here, I think. Lovely views on M62. So happy days.
Fantastic.
Northern Lad saying hi to Cat, and everyone's just saying hi to everybody else. I'm just looking through the rest of the chat. Martin Wooldridge is here as well.
People are coming up with
Jean's
names
told me
for the
that
wheel
speaking
already.
too loud. So
Yeah.
I'll be quiet a little bit, Tian, if you want. Yeah, she's had a busy day at work. She just fell asleep, I think.
No, that's right.
And Matthew Harris as well. He's saying hello to everyone. And Mark
Wonderful.
Bannister.
Fantastic.
So,
There's a couple people that are sort of suggesting names for the wheel. Martin Wooldridge says Tom's Turntable, which I quite like that one. Visions International Prop Picker. I did see some more. I'm sure I did. We'll get through it anyway. But if you can think of a name for the spinny wheel of destiny, which is what I'm calling it at the moment until a cooler name comes up, do put them into the chat. And like I said, get your questions into Cat as we go forward. Also, I'm not a bank robber. I'm not a bank robber. No, it's not a polite way of saying it, unfortunately. But no, I'm literally in the removals business, not a bank robber or a thief of any kind. But anyway, let's go into the show. So, firstly, like we sort of said at the beginning, it's great to have you back on the show. I know we did episode 3 on a different format. So for anybody that sort of didn't watch at that time, very briefly, just sort of explain your sort of role in the industry and sort of how you sort of got started with sort of jumping into being a pilot.
Yeah, I was fated to be a pilot from about the age of 6 months, to be honest. My dad was a pilot. He came over during the Second World War. He was trained to fly Halifaxes and Lancasters, but he never quite got operational. He was still at the operational conversion unit down at RAF St Athan when the war ended. And by that stage, he'd met my mum. And they got married in 1946. And my first experience of an aeroplane, having been trained as a bomber pilot during the war, immediately after the war, when he joined the Royal Auxiliary Air Force in the UK, he was immediately put on jet fighters. So he was flying Vampires and Meteors. And he stuck me in the cockpit of his Vampire and started the engine. And apparently I came out in a rash with fright.
Oh, God.
So my mum gave it him in the neck for the next 6 months. And, it was me hooked. I knew I was going to be a pilot from then on. Flew with my dad. He got a job with Cambrian Airways. By the time I was about 4, I think he was flying for Cambrian. And, we flew down to Jersey. I think it was my first flight in a DC-3. And from then on, I was on airplanes the whole time. By the time I was 6, I'd learned to use the dreaded whiz wheel, which all the trainee pilots will know is the little circular computer that allows us to calculate headings and drifts and tracks and speeds and all that sort of thing. I could use that by the age of 6, and he'd even taught me to plot by the age of 6, so that I knew what the whiz wheel was actually doing. So I was steeped in aviation from childhood. Once I got to the age of 14, I became an air cadet. I learned to fly gliders and then powered airplanes with the air cadets. And I then got sponsored by Cambrian Airways to become a commercial pilot. I did my training up in Perth in Scotland. And before my 21st birthday, I was a Viscount First Officer.
Wow.
And 45 years later, a British Airways.
Many people.
Sorry, Steve.
Because not many people apprenticeship starts at 6 months old, is there? That's for sure.
Not really. No. It was never going to be anything else for me. I was always going to be a pilot. So.
Fantastic. Go on, Steve.
I was going to say, look, you said about the and that. Obviously, they're completely different to sort of prop or jet engines or whatever. What was it like to be flying the gliders?
I didn't fly them for very long. I got my 3 solo launches in, and that was pretty much the end of my gliding career. It was a stepping stone towards powered aircraft for me, and I respect people who fly gliders very much. It's a very particular skill, and it's one that I have to try and teach to my students when we're flying forced landings. And I actually use a glider pilot training video so that they know how best to pick a field, because glider pilots pick a field on most of their flights. You know, if they're landing out, then they're going to land in a field, and they want to know how best to pick a field that's not going to damage the glider. So we use their training videos to teach students how to pick the best field to land in an emergency.
I was going to ask you about actually training in Perth in Scotland. Would you say being trained in Perth in Scotland is throwing you right in at the deep end, just with conditions and things like that? I can't imagine it being the nicest place to fly around weather-wise.
Oh, it's pretty good. I mean, the east coast of Scotland is much more protected than the west in terms of storms and rain and things like that.
Right.
The worst weather we experienced was Bahar, the sea fog that comes in off the North Sea, and that did close us down for about a month.
Wow.
But we made best use of it. We disappeared off in a beaten up old car that we'd bought for the entire course. And we headed for the distilleries, and we were in a different distillery every day, and we'd phone up every morning and say, any flying later on? And they'd say, no, the Ha's still here. So we'd carry on to yet another distillery, and we did a good distillery crawl all around Speyside and the northern distilleries, and right the way across to the Isle of Skye. So
fantastic, yeah.
We didn't waste.
Blessing in disguise. Then,
yeah, you could have written a little.
Yeah, we didn't waste that time.
No, definitely not.
Go on, Steve.
Written a little guidebook. Sounds good.
Well, I
could have written a little guidebook of.
I found Glenmorangie during that pub crawl and that distillery crawl, and that's been my favourite tipple ever since, I think.
Fantastic. So, in terms of
flying the, sorry,
I was going to say, in terms of starting off with Cambrian, tell us. I mean, not a lot. I mean, I say at the time when we did the first show, not a lot of people sort of knew Cambrian to begin with. So, just for those that might not know and maybe still won't know, just sort of explain like Cambrian, who they were, and sort of what kind of like routes and stuff that they sort of flew, and of course when you flew with them, what routes you took.
So Cambrian was the West Coast airline of the UK. By the time I joined them, we were a wholly owned subsidiary of BEA. That went back to an unfortunate order for the Handley Page Dart Herald. But Cambrian as a company went back to the 1930s. It was called Cambrian Air Services before the war, and they did literally routes around South Wales. By the time aviation resumed after the First World War, they had a fleet of doves and herons and a lot of surplus DC-3s.
Wow.
And flew out of Cardiff, Pangham Moor, long before Roos, from Haverfordwest and from Swansea, and flew up to North Wales and that sort of thing. Eventually, they made this order for the Handley Page Dart Herald, and it failed to meet all its performance guarantees, so they cancelled the order.
Okay.
Thinking no more about it, really, but Handley Page sued. And unfortunately, or fortunately, you may think, Handley Page won. So it put Cambrian into bankruptcy, and at that point, BEA bought all the shares, bought Cambrian out of bankruptcy effectively. And from that point on, we were run as a low-cost carrier. So the routes which BEA couldn't operate at a profit because of their cost base, they gave to Cambrian Airways on the West Coast. On the East Coast, they did the same thing with an airline called BKS. And they gave Cambrian Viscounts, initially the Viscount 700. Cambrian started flying inclusive tour charters down to the places like Palma. And that was the fleet in the 60s. And then eventually they gave us the Viscount 800, which replaced the 700 for us. And by that stage, our staple was flying out of Liverpool to the Isle of Man.
Wow.
And I went to the Isle of Man 937 times in my first 7 years as a pilot.
Wow.
And a typical day's work would be something like Liverpool, Isle of Man, Belfast, Isle of Man, Manchester, Isle of Man, Liverpool. Or Liverpool, Isle of Man, Belfast, Edinburgh. Belfast, Isle of Man, Liverpool. Typical, 6-sector working days, that sort of thing on the Viscount. Then eventually in 1974, British Airways was formed.
Cool, yeah.
And everybody remembers that British Airways was formed from BEA and BOAC, the two big airways corporations. But in fact, there were two other component companies, Cambrian and BKS by this stage had rebranded and become Northeast. They were based in Newcastle and Leeds, and they were the fourth component company. So we had about just under 5,000 pilots in total from that combined workforce. About 1,500 were ex-BOAC, about 3,000 were ex-BEA, and the remaining 500 or so were about 400 or just shy of 400 from Cambrian and just over 100 from Northeast.
Wow.
So we were all component companies in the original formation of British Airways. So I was really fortunate that meant that my date of joining Cambrian became my date of joining British Airways.
Brilliant.
So my date of joining was before British Airways existed. So I was like, on the 1st of April 1974, British Airways joined me.
and you've been privileged ever since.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you didn't go to them; they went to you.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, we've actually got what you sent to us. Is actually a picture that you had after your retirement in regards to the fleet that you flew. So we're going to bring it up onto the screen, and we'll have a sort of a quick sort of discussion about it. Let me just get rid of that top bit there. There we go. So we can all see each other. So this is the graphic that you sent us, and this is what was sent to you after retirement.
Yeah.
And as we discussed it yesterday when we had a chat before doing this. It's quite a vast, it's quite a difference in terms of what you started with, and then sort of what you ended up finishing with. Sort of, obviously, flying with the Viscounts and stuff like that. Must have been sort of quite, were they nice aircraft to fly, or were they sort of like quite, tricky sort of to handle on that?
They were heavy. It was before the days of powered controls, so the only assistance we really had to moving the controls were things called servo tabs, and a servo tab moves in the opposite direction to the main control surfaces. The elevator in particular had a servo tab, and it literally just gives that little bit of aerodynamic assistance to moving the controls. But they were heavy. They were very definitely a two-handed pilot, and you used muscles to move the airplane around. So they weren't the most maneuverable of aircraft, but they were a pleasant aircraft to fly. They were very good at their job. We had 73 seats on them, and it shifted 7 tons of newspapers at night. I mean, a typical Viscount day would be one crew would pick it up in Liverpool in the morning and fly it to Glasgow and back. And then they'd get off having finished their day because they'd started at 6:20 in the morning. Oh, the first takeoff was at 6:20 in the morning. And then the next crew would fly from Liverpool to Bristol to Cardiff to Jersey and back to Cardiff, back to Bristol, back to Liverpool. And they'd get off having done that lot. And then the third crew would get on and fly back up to Glasgow and back. So effectively during the day, starting at about 8 in the morning, departing from Glasgow, but somebody could go all the way from Glasgow to Jersey and back in the day. And that was a typical use for that aeroplane. So typically it may do anything up to 10 flights in the day with 70 passengers on board. And then another fairly typical one was we'd fly the last passenger flight into the Isle of Man at around about 8 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden the loading team would come and they'd take every seat out of the aeroplane and they'd load on a little bit of general freight. And we'd fly that back to Liverpool that night. But then in the next morning, the 5 o'clock freighter would be loaded with 7 tons of newspapers for the Isle of Man. So we'd fly all the newspapers into the Isle of Man first thing in the morning. We'd get off and go down to a local guest house for breakfast and a snooze in her sitting room. And they'd put all the seats back in, and the first load of passengers would be ready by 9 o'clock to fly back to Liverpool.
Amazing.
God. I mean,
so a real workhorse of an airplane.
Yeah, incredibly versatile.
I was going to say. Oh, sorry, Steve. What were you saying?
I'm just saying, incredibly versatile.
Oh yeah. I was going to ask. The planes are being used pretty much 24/7, aren't they? I mean,
for
do
sure,
they never
yeah.
get a rest?
Well, not really if we can avoid it. I mean, we're paying for them 24/7, so
Yeah.
they while they're sitting on the ground, they're not earning money for the airline, and most airlines can't afford that. The way Airbus were selling them to charter airlines several years ago, they were only paying for them when they used them. So very often you'd see one parked at Gatwick all week, and it would only fly at weekends. But that was a very particular financing deal. For the most part, the airplane has to fly. A long-haul airplane typically will fly out and back and then out again in the day if it's just going to the east coast of the States, or it will take off from London and fly down to Sydney and back or something. And it will only ever be on the ground for about 70 or 75 minutes on each of those turnarounds. It just doesn't pay to keep them on the ground.
No, I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, the engineering, what has to go into something like that for it to be as efficient and as, you got to trust this thing. I mean, I wouldn't do that in a car because I don't think it'd do it. You couldn't run a car for that sort of length of time without resting it and checking everything and what have you. I know they do get checked over and what have you, but there's a lot more engineering and a lot more to go wrong, I suppose, in a massive aircraft like that than what there is in a car. And it's a testament really to the engineering behind it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, don't forget airplanes. We have a thing called the minimum equipment list, or in British Airways, it used to be called the dispatch deviation manual. And what that does is say, if something is wrong with the airplane, is it safe to fly?
Yeah.
So is it acceptable to fly with that defect in place? What have the engineers got to do to make it secure and safe?
Yeah.
And then what differences do the pilots have to make to the operation to make it safe and expeditious?
Yeah.
So all of those in the British Airways dispatch deviation manual brought it all into one book.
Yeah.
British Airways have now gone back to just using the minimum equipment list, which means you've got to look up stuff in the maintenance manual and the ops manual to see how to cope with the problem. But the principle is the same. Airplanes don't have to be utterly serviceable every time you fly them, but they have to be safe.
Of course, yeah.
And those manuals are always written with the next worst case failure in mind.
Yeah.
So very often there might be something that you could happily fly with for the rest of a flight, but you wouldn't take off again.
No.
Because the rules while you're in flight are that you follow the flight manual. The rules once you're on the ground is that you follow the minimum equipment.
Okay, right. Yeah. Yes, it's amazing. And you actually helped write one of these manuals, didn't you?
I did. I wrote the dispatch deviation manual for the 747-400 when we first got it.
Yeah.
I was the first line co-pilot, as we call it. First officer on the 747-400. I went out to Amsterdam with the very first course to learn to fly it with Boeing instructors and the KLM simulator, which was the first up and running on the planet. And I got cornered in the bar one night by the technical office, the technical captain, the chief technical officer of the aeroplane, and his sidekick, first officer in the same office. And they said, "Cat, you haven't got a job." I said, "What do you mean I haven't got a job? I'm a pilot." And they said, no, a proper job. And they dumped this dispatch deviation manual in my lap and basically said, if you write that for us over the next 6 months, by the time the aeroplane arrives, we'll pay you as if half your flying hours were covered by the writing, and you get to pick and choose your own roster effectively. So I said, yeah, that'll do me nicely.
Yeah, happy days.
So I spent most of my time, what I'd actually do is not fly at all for a month and concentrate on the manual. And then I'd fly a full month the next month, and typically spend my time sitting on the beach in Mauritius typing away on a very primitive early laptop computer.
Yeah, God, it's an odd life, isn't it? Being a pilot.
Oh, it was dreadful.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? But I can imagine, though. I mean, you've got the. Number one, you're writing a manual for a brand new aircraft, aren't you? One what's not really entered service into British Airways at the time.
Yeah, so I had source material to go to. the modern glass cockpit airplanes, everything is in messages. So you get all sorts of different grades of messages, everything from a warning, which might be a fire, down to a memo message, which might mean you've got something switched on that you need to remember is switched on, like the APU or the fasten seatbelt signs. So each of those comes up as a different level of message. And there are also status messages, which are basically things that latch on in flight if anything failed in flight.
Yeah.
So when you get on the ground, you look at those status messages and put them in the tech log for engineers to look at.
Yeah.
So
Did that? Sorry,
the
I was going
airplane
to say, did that manual?
sorry, the airplane that was closest to that were the 75 and 767. So I'd got the dispatch deviation manual from those aircraft.
Yeah.
So that I'd get a handle on messages. I'd also got the dispatch deviation manual from the 747 Classic, and that basically covered a fairly similar array of systems. They weren't all the same.
No.
The 747-400 was greatly updated.
Yeah.
And so that was the basis. Plus, I went off to Seattle and had meetings with Boeing and the FAA and the CAA and the unions and everybody else who had a stake in what this manual said.
Yeah.
And very often we were asking for more restriction than the regulator was. For instance, autopilot. On the Classic, you could fly the 747 Classic with no autopilot. And we said we didn't want that ability on the 747-400 because with only 2 crew instead of 3, it would become simply too tiring. And without the extra pair of eyes of the flight engineer, it would be less safe as an operation. So we said we didn't want the ability to fly the aircraft without the autopilot, other than a short flight to somewhere where the autopilot was going to get fixed. So typically that might mean if it's broken at Gatwick, we can fly it to Heathrow to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The longest flight that we would entertain would be 2 hours. So, that's the easiest way to sort of try and justify it. But all of those things were negotiated with the FAA, the CAA, and the pilot unions and the engineering unions. Another one typically was a thing called wheel tie bolts. An aircraft wheel, unlike a car wheel where you have to sort of lever the tire over the rim, aircraft wheels come apart so that you put them like a plate on either side of the tire.
Yeah.
And they're held together by things called wheel tie bolts. And our engineers didn't want more than 2 wheel tie bolts per wheel to be allowable for the obvious reasons that they didn't want to see a failure. They certainly didn't want to see a failure while somebody was working on the wheel. So again, we talked Boeing down and said we don't want the ability to have 4 wheel tie bolts failed. We're only happy with 2. So that's what ended up in the manuals.
All right, right. And I suppose there would have been a lot of because obviously you went to Amsterdam in the flight simulator and things like that, but you weren't just being taught how to fly the plane. I suppose you were being taught everything about the plane, even sort of the engineering side of it and everything. So to help you along with this manual.
To a certain extent, obviously I've been flying the 747 Classic for about 3 years by that stage.
Yeah.
I did know the 747. The course you do when you convert to any aeroplane includes an element of engineering. So you have a background understanding of the systems. But from the 400 on, it was comparatively superficial. It was, you need to know the basics of how a system works. You need to know the controls for the system. And you need to know what to do if the system isn't behaving normally. So, for instance, it might be the electrical system is 4 integrated drive generators, IDGs, 1 on each engine. They've got a disconnect function, but if you operate the disconnect, they stay disconnected until an engineer comes and reconnects them.
Right, okay.
And they've got various buzz tie breakers, which allow them to be connected in different ways to the aircraft systems. Whether or not that be the normal way or a fallback way. If perhaps one of the buzzes has failed, you may still be able to connect the generator in a different way. And so basically, we've got an understanding of how the system works, but on a superficial basis.
Yeah.
But a great deal of understanding of how to use the system.
Yeah.
Now, the generation before we had flight engineers. And the flight engineers did the same course as the pilots, then went off for an extra 6 weeks of intensive training on the aircraft systems, so they could take out a spanner and fix something down the route, which pilots would never even contemplate.
Fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah, it's quite a nice insight actually to sort of the whole thing. I think it's a bit of a breath of fresh air really to hear sort of this side of things from from this perspective, as opposed to sort of you tend to read up on it from time to time, but to actually hear someone sort of talking about it is actually say like a proper breath of fresh air. We'll just take a quick pause because we've got a buttload of comments that we're going to try and get through here, and some questions for yourself there, Kat. So
yeah, I've seen a few questions scrolling past. Be good to get one or two of those.
Yeah, we'll get them answered. So I can assure you I have trousers on. All right. I've got shorts on, but they are technically trousers. I've got them on, I promise you.
I'm not so sure about Steve. I think he's still under the duvet.
Steve's got internet problems because of the wind at the moment. So he's bailed on us but he'll be in the chat, hopefully. Northern lad I know has disappeared, so thank you for joining us. But he also said this, just so you know, I worked for 40 odd years at Rolls-Royce as an engineer, so I've worked on many of the engines that you've flown with, which is quite nice.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm just trying to go through here. Marco Barrett for the picture saying, "Wow, that's quite the CV."
Yeah, it was a good career and great fun, Marco.
I was going to ask you before, Kat. Was there any point in your career where you've either got like sort of headhunted, or you fancied bailing and going working for another airline? You was happy with BA all your career?
I wouldn't say I was happy with BA every day of my career.
No.
But on balance, there was nothing else that would have offered me the same variety of work. By the end, I was on the 777, and the only reason I'd left my real aviation love, the 400, was the route structure. And for me, long haul flying was where I gravitated to, where I loved, and that was all about routes, not the aircraft type.
Right. Okay.
While I love Boeing aircraft and the 400 in particular, I wasn't prepared to stay on the 400 when it lost its last beach. And that's not to say I spent all my life on the beach, but I wasn't happy with an airplane that never went to a beach, because I was a scuba diver as well, scuba diving instructor. And, I used to bid around, where am I going to get the most dives in? And if that meant I needed to go to Antigua or Mauritius, so be it. And Mauritius was the last beach on the 747. I didn't go to Mauritius very much afterwards, but I did go to the Caribbean when I went to the 777, and a lot. In the winter, I'd typically be San Diego, Antigua, Delhi, and then Barbados or something like that. That would be a typical month's work, which doesn't sound much, going to work 4 times a month, but each of those would be 4 or 5 days away from home. So it would still be 20 plus days away from home in the month, but only actually driving up the M4 to work once a month, 4 times a month.
Yeah.
Yes. It's not a bad month's work though, is it?
No, it's not bad at all. No, I mean, the advantage, I ended up as number 2 on the 777, number 6 in the entire airline. So I got to write my own roster every month. I never once clashed with the number 1 on the 777. He didn't like going to the same places as me. So we never ever bumped into one another in terms of him bidding for something that I'd wanted, so that I didn't get it.
Yeah,
it's always an auction getting your work in British Airways. The most senior person gets their first choice. The second most senior person gets their first choice, as long as number 1 didn't want it. And if number 1 did want it, they get the second choice, and so on down until for your fleet and seats. So captain on the 777, 450 of them. Number 450 does as he's told.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, we'll jump onto sort of the routes and stuff shortly, because I remember from last time there were some good stories about the types of routes and everything that you've flown. And I think I remember you've flown to one particular airport, which I think sits in a lot of aviation enthusiast hearts. But we'll get on to that after we get through some of these questions. It's really good questions that I've actually looked at already. So some good questions. Yeah. One in particular from Henry Fox, who says, a question for Captain Cat. I don't know if you've seen the documentary on Netflix, The Downfall of Boeing, featuring the 2 tragedies of the 737 MAX aircraft. Do you feel that modern aircraft have too many complex systems?
No, I don't. Not really, Henry. I think that in order for two people to cope with the complexities of a modern aircraft, we need those systems to be highly automated. When we moved from the Classic to the 747-400, we lost that extra pair of hands and eyes behind us operating all the systems, because that's what flight engineers do. They operate fuel and pressurization and all those sorts of things. And when you've only got the two pilots who up until then had just been concerned with flying, communicating, and navigating, adding in all those systems would become too much of a workload. So you have to put a layer of automation between the pilots and what the flight engineer would have done. Inevitably, that makes these systems really complex. We do get trained in how the system works and the basics of it. I think the downfall with the 777 MAX aircraft is one I recognized from transitioning from the 747 Classic to the 400. It was in Boeing's interest to sell that transition as very simple, that both of them are 747s, the pilots will be able to do it with just a quick differences course. That wasn't the truth. The aircraft were fundamentally different in the operating principle. They were glass cockpit, and a lot of the pilots that came off the Classic onto the 400 had never seen a glass cockpit. And they handled completely differently. The wing was a completely new design on the 400. It may look roughly the same, but there's not a single common panel. There's different numbers of leading edge flaps, for instance, and slats. The whole aircraft is new, but Boeing wouldn't have been able to sell that idea to the airlines as easily as they were able to say, well, your pilots already fly the 747. They'll have no trouble converting to this in just a few days.
Yeah.
And I noticed another question asked, how long does it take to go from one aircraft type to another? And the simple answer to that is it takes about 8 working days for the technical course these days, because it's all done audio-visual style, computer screens up where the windscreens would be on the aeroplane and all the panels in place, so that you can basically go through a training thing. It says, we're now going to talk about the fuel panel, identify the fuel panel on your trainer and press start when ready. And that's how you go through the training. And it's really quick. It's really effective. Gets you through the technical exams very, very quickly and proficiently. What it doesn't necessarily do is leave you with the in-depth knowledge that you're going to pick up over the first year, perhaps, of flying the airplane. And at the end of that first year, all the pilots have to then go back into the training school and sit further exams, just to demonstrate that they've improved their technical knowledge over that year. So for that first year of a new type in service, both pilots are going to be comparatively inexperienced on type. And that's the case with the 777 MAX as well. The fundamental difference between the 777-800, let's say, and the 777-8 MAX is that the engines are mounted higher and further forward. I don't know if you can remember, well, most people who looked at airplanes will certainly remember that the bottom of the engines on a 737 rather, are squashed.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that the 737 was designed with a much skinnier engine in mind, the Pratt & Whitney JT8, which was on the 200s.
Yeah.
And that fitted under the wing quite nicely. But the gear on the 737 is very short. You can't walk under the fuselage of a 737. You can under the fuselage of an A320. So the whole airplane sits much lower to the ground. So in order to fit these much bigger fan engines onto the wing, they squashed the bottom. Only of the cowling, obviously the fan itself is circular, but that's how they accommodated it on everything up to and including the Dash 800. When they re-engined that aircraft and called it the MAX, the engine is slightly bigger again, and the only way they could accommodate it at all was to move it forward and up. So it's sitting, in fact, in front of the wing, as opposed to underneath the wing. And that altered the balance of the aircraft. And aircraft balance the load sheet doesn't tell you exactly how tight these balance limits are. But on the 737, it's less than 2 meters that the center of gravity can move, depending how you load the aeroplane.
Yeah.
On a Chipmunk, it's less than 6 inches. So different aircraft have different tolerances.
Yeah.
But by moving the engine forward, you fundamentally affected the balance of the aeroplane. And when an airplane has a very nose-heavy balance, it becomes really quite difficult to handle in certain circumstances. Most notably, it's very difficult to flare because there's too much weight forward and you haven't got the control authority to get that nose up for the landing.
Yeah.
So they had to compensate for that by electronic stability aids. And unfortunately, by selling the aeroplane to the airlines as being a simple conversion, if you can fly a 737-800, you can fly the Dash 8 Max. It's simply not true. You had to know what those extra systems were doing and how to compensate for them if they malfunctioned. And that was Boeing's big mistake, was pushing a much too short conversion course between the Dash 800 and the Dash 8 Max.
Wow.
And they
Well,
did exactly the same thing in the early 80s the 1979 when we picked up the first 400s. There were lots of things about the 400. I remember the first time I flew the 400 with passengers on board and a captain who'd had similar training to me. Neither of us had been above 10,000 feet. We'd done all our training out in Seattle on the aeroplane. And we were cleared to fly, sent back home, and a week later, rostering said, right, you're off to Philadelphia. And throughout that first 4 flights, Philadelphia with a shuttle to Pittsburgh and then back to London, Carl and myself, the most common words that were heard on the flight deck were, what the F is it doing now? Because the automation was glossed over in all of this training. Certainly from the point of view of actual use of it, hands-on experience with the buttons and the knobs. And, it was constantly doing things that we weren't quite expecting. None of them were dangerous, but all of them caught us by surprise. And I can imagine what happened with the Dash 8 Max was it simply caught the pilots by surprise.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have been something that caused them real problems, but they weren't well enough trained to cope with what it did.
Wow, it's quite. I say it's quite in depth to hear from, I suppose, from yourself. Someone that's actually flown on the, for numerous years the 747-400, and I don't think any of us, like I certainly didn't think it. I don't think maybe Ian didn't think it, and those people in the comments that didn't think it about the 747-400 having these hidden issues.
Yeah, I mean, they with the 747-400, as I say, they were interesting. I mean, it was a learning experience for all of us.
Yeah.
And that learning experience, of course, went on for the first year or so. I remember flying a flight on the 400. It had got tip seals on the fan, which were a huge boost to fuel efficiency. And our Rolls-Royce engineer that chipped in with a comment saying about the Rolls-Royce engines that I'd flown. Well, these were Rolls-Royce RB211-524-G, or just G/H, if you like. The G and the H are the same engine. They just have a little plug-in chip on the side of a fuel controller, which limits the takeoff power on the G because we're going to be using climb power for longer. And by doing that, they gave us the same engine life on the G on the 400 and the H on the 76.
Wow.
So this tip seal was untried effectively. And I remember flying one flight, which we were supposed to be going from Heathrow to New York. And as we were passing Shannon, we got an engine vibration indication. And again, automated, it pops up on screen without any intervention from us to say high vibration engine number 1 or whichever one it was. But because I'd been in the tech office, I knew how to interrogate much deeper into the systems. So I was able to pull up the maintenance pages and look at the actual probe readings for all the different vibration sensors on all 4 engines. And I could see exactly which probe was causing the problem. And a diagnostic tool which pilots are able to use, whereas we had direct connections to the engines on the Classic with a cable, you could just put your finger on a throttle and feel the vibration. You can't do that with a FADEC, a full authority digital engine control, because it's all electronic.
Yeah.
But what we could do is move the throttle. And if I move the throttle on this engine, I got what's called transient worsening. So whenever the engine's in a steady state, it will be at a certain vibration level. But as soon as you ask it to accelerate or decelerate, the vibration goes up.
Okay.
And then it then settles down pro rata to the engine RPM.
Oh, okay.
So if I move the throttle to advance it, I got transient worsening, and then it settled down as a little tiny bit more vibration than the previous setting. And if I pulled the throttle back, I got the transient worsening, and then it settled back to a little bit less than the original vibration. So by doing all that and actually getting on the satellite comm to Heathrow and telling them exactly what I was seeing, they said, yeah, that's definitely genuine vibration. Bring the aircraft back to London. We don't want it in New York. We can't fix it there as easily. So bring it back to London. So we turned round, flew back to London. And of course, when I landed, we were immediately surrounded by engineers, but we were also surrounded by the technical office, the technical captain that had given me the job of writing a manual, but also the technical part captain for the 767, which we were just introducing. And we wanted it to go ETOP straight away. So the first thing they said was, did you shut it down? And I said, no, of course we didn't. We just throttled it back and let it run all its gearboxes and its generators and things. Why would we shut it down? It was in limits when we got it throttled back to idle, so we just left it running. They said, oh, thank God for that. If you'd shut it down, it would have screwed the engine's reliability figures, and we'd never have been able to go ETOPS for the first year or two on the 7.6. So that was the sort of insight that you gain from working in the tech office. That how important it is not to do more than you need when you're looking after an engine like that.
Oh, wicked. Okay, yeah. Again, some more really, really good insight there in terms. I think at the end, like I said, a lot of people had no idea that the 747-400 had like issues or anything else like that. So it's quite a surprise, and I suppose it opens up people's eyes, I think, to sort of Boeing again. But that's again completely different story. But it's again really cool to hear sort of these sort of. I mean, you've got the experience of it, so we can take your word for it. So it's so it's great. We're going to try and fly through some of these questions now.
Just a quick note on one that's just popped up near the top there from Sam Smith.
Yes.
Hi, Cat. Luke and I are watching. Luke is Sam's son, and he is a newly qualified commercial pilot, I believe.
Oh, fantastic!
Oh, fantastic! Well done.
Yeah, well done.
He's been doing his frozen ATPL course down at Exeter, and he's been doing really well down there. I've been keeping an eye on him by chatting to some of his instructors. So he's been working really hard, and we're all really proud of him.
Oh, well done.
Brilliant, fantastic. There's a small round of, I say small round, but well done to you. Yeah, well done to you for that. Really good to see more people getting into the industry. That's big thumbs up from us here. We've got to see if I can scroll all the way up here. There's so many to go through. Emma Myers has popped in to say, "Fantastic captain to fly with. Great to see you again, Cat."
Yeah, Emma was one of the cabin crew that I worked with at British Airways, and fantastic to see you, Emma. Cabin crew, fantastic unsung heroes of the industry, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Everybody thinks of them as just bringing the teas and coffees, but they're not there for that.
No.
They're there to pull you out of an airplane 50 foot underwater when it's upside down and the lights have gone out, and they will.
Yeah.
And I've had friends. We had a 737-200 that went off the runway in flames in Manchester, all the way back in, what would that have been, 1985. And two of the cabin crew died on board that. I knew both of them. That's cabin crew for you. They are there to save your life when you really need it. Not enough people pay attention to them during that briefing.
I think they're more than just trolley dollies, aren't they? So
very much so. Very much so.
Potential future guest, maybe.
They are.
Just
they are fantastic professionals, and they have my utmost respect.
Yeah, potential future guest, maybe. Just going to put that out there. Just going to put that out there. A question from Ken Carr, who, again, we must thank for allowing us to stream on Two Visions Aviation. So, big thumbs up and a big hello to you. He asks, what was the TriStar like to fly?
I only flew it for 10 months. I was with British Air Tours flying the 737. The TriStar was at the time I went on it, it was flying a mix of long and short haul, which was quite appealing. We flew in it to Los Angeles. We took 10 days to get to Los Angeles and back.
Wow.
British Air Tours used to stuff 400 people onto a TriStar, which meant we couldn't even use the extra fuel on the bigger TriStar. So we just used TriStar ones.
Yeah.
And, we'd go from Gatwick to Bangor in Maine, change crew and refuel, and then another crew would take it on to Los Angeles. And then when they came back, they'd have to change crew again in Bangor. So it used to take us 10 days to get to the West Coast and back.
Good God.
It was an interesting aeroplane. It's beautifully engineered, probably a bit like some British airplanes, over-engineered. Boeing's built everything just enough so that it's got all the strength it needs, but it doesn't have anything excess. So it becomes an extremely efficient business machine. The TriStar was much less so. And for me, I never enjoyed handling the TriStar. It had a system called direct lift control. And what that meant was that when you were on the approach and you selected the flap, instead of moving the control column back and forward directly affecting the pitch of the airplane used to go up and down like a lift, like this, without the pitch changing, because what was attached to the elevator control then was the spoilers, which had popped up on the wing to a new reference point of slightly open. So without moving the controls, you've got a certain amount of spoiled lift. As soon as you pulled back on the control column, the spoilers would go away and the airplane would generate more lift. So you had direct control of the lift. And if you push the nose forward, the nose would stay where it was at plus 11 degrees, and the spoilers would come further up and the airplane would descend like a lift. So you were bouncing up and down on the approach without any pitch change. And it meant that it was extremely twitchy in pitch. You couldn't fly an attitude, which is what pilots like to do.
Yeah.
You had to fly the direct lift and literally control yourself on the glide slope that way. But at the same time, the control column was tiny. It was smaller than the control wheel on a Piper. And it was probably a little bit underpowered. So you've got this extremely twitchy pitch control and an extremely heavy roll control. And for me, that's the wrong way round. You want pitch to be slightly less easy to move than roll.
Yeah, of course.
For a well-harmonized set of controls. And the rudders should be the heaviest of the lot, of course. But it wasn't particularly well-harmonized, so I didn't enjoy flying it very much. I was only on it for 10 months. If I'd been on it longer, I might have learned to love it. But by the end of 10 months, they decided it was going short haul only. So they'd got far too many crews on it. They said, have we got any volunteers to go back to your previous type? So I went back to the 7.3. And they put me back on the 7.3, but unfrozen. So I could then bid straight off again to long haul because I decided I really liked long haul. And I went on to the 747 at the end of that extra year on the 7.3.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. And not just me says it's fantastic. There's a lot of comments that I'm scrolling through here that are saying it's really interesting to hear what you're saying. Great insights. People saying hello to you. Yeah, a lot of people enjoying this show this evening and sort of listening to your story. Still plenty to come. Like, I know we're an hour in, but there's still plenty to go. So I'm not going to miss an opportunity for another question. If we have to drag this out till midnight, I'll do it. All right, we're not going to go that far, but yeah, we'll get through everything that we can. As and when we can. But very quick diversion to Ken Carr, who says, don't forget that the A380 data files book that he's been working very, very hard on. He spoke about it on the show a couple of weeks ago. He's finally finished it, and it's going to be available from Friday on the Visions International website. So do go check that out if you fancy it. I know Steve was a big fan of wanting to get that, so I'm sure he'll be buying that. But if you want to purchase your copy, go onto the website. It's in the chat, and purchase that book and show Ken some love for the hard work he's put into it.
I think I noticed another question from Visions International. I half answered it earlier on.
Yes.
when I said it was about 8 days of ground school.
The conversion, yeah.
From there, the conversion goes into the simulator, and for most aircraft, that's 40 hours of simulator flying, which is 10 details of 4 hours each. And from there, you go and fly the airplane. And if it's a 0 flight time conversion, which most are, the first time you fly the airplane, it will have passengers on board, but you'll be with the highest level of instructor, the base training captain, who would otherwise have taken you to base training in the airplane. But because you've done that in the simulator, your first 4 landings on the airplane have to be with a base trainer, but with passengers in the back, just on normal routes.
Yeah, I know you touched upon it without the question being asked, so it was kind of, it kind of fits in with the two, with what we were talking about with the conversion and everything else. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that's answered the question for that. There is another question that Ken's put, but I'm going to save that until the end because that'll be a completely different topic. It's one that we've got your permission to talk about, but we'll do that at the end, just to kind of end the whole thing on. But there's a few hellos. So Jane Harkus is there, so I hope you're well. Lots of people loving the show this evening as I'm scrolling through right now. Ken asking to share the stream and stuff, so fantastic, good to see. There's some names that I recognise as well, like Gail Leary, she's watching. So hello to you. Who else are we seeing here? There are lots of names. Just going to try and see if I can get through. Lots of people congratulating Luke as well. Jack Roll, Sarah Pass, Josh Cunningham, Ken Carr. Lots of people, like I said, Catherine Norman, all congratulating Luke on Leslie White as well. All congratulating Luke for his, passing the test and everything else. Lots of hellos. There's literally so much to go through. It's not even funny. Jack Rolls, hide your APUs. Jack Rolls is here. He says, Kat, did you ever get to witness the magnificent Concorde? I think I know the answer to this one, but go ahead and answer it.
I flew on Concorde twice, both times to the USA, because a crew member had gone sick and they needed somebody out there to fly back the next morning. So on one occasion it was to New York, and then it was Thanksgiving, so there were no flights. So we ended up having to drive all the way to Boston to fly back the next morning to the UK. Second one was a simpler outing. It was again to New York, but it was to fly back that night on a flight from New York. I never flew Concorde. I was invited, and I turned them down, which kind of surprised them. Nobody ever turned Concorde down. It was hand-picked training for Concorde. They only picked people they thought would pass because it was very, very expensive. It was the last chalk and talk, so classroom with a blackboard type course, as opposed to all this audio-visual stuff we do now. I didn't want to go on it because it was so restricted in routes. And for me, flying was about where I was going.
Yeah.
Concorde was one of those airplanes. It would have been lovely to get on board Concorde, fly out over the Bay of Biscay, take it up to Mach 2, bring it back again, do 3 circuits, and a few touch and goes and a go around something, and come back and land and say that was great fun. You can have your airplane back now. But they wanted you to go on it for the rest of your life. Basically, it was. There's this system of freezes. Once you've gone onto a new airplane, you have to stay long enough to justify the training cost. So typically with British Airways, that's 4 or 5 years. And then you can go on to a different airplane. With Concorde, it was the rest of your career as a first officer. You can only come off it to become a captain on something else. And then if you went on it as a captain, it was until retirement. So it was, it was a real, it would have been lovely for a few years, but not for the rest of my life. I was
just
happy
briefly,
with the 777, the 747.
Just briefly, obviously, you've been on it. What was the experience like getting to New York in a good few, a couple hours?
It was very short haul, to be honest. It was like going to Lisbon or something like that. It literally felt like a short haul experience. The seating was short haul standard. The food was very good, but served in a short haul way.
Yeah.
So whereas first class is, at that stage, first class was pushed about on a trolley and carved in front of you. They'd have a beautiful baron of beef or something, and they'd have the carving implements, and they'd literally slice you off the bits you wanted.
Yeah.
None of that on Concorde. It came on a plastic tray and got plonked down in front of you.
That's because you don't get much time to eat it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. So it was a
Fantastic.
very short haul experience. To be
Yeah.
honest.
Oh,
And
nice one.
the crews were short haul as well.
Oh, okay.
The cabin crew were all they flew Concorde and short haul.
Wow. Yeah, I would love to have been able to get onto it, but I'm far too young then can fly on my own. And of course, it was very costly, which we've spoken about in previous episodes. We won't go into that. Jane Harkus, a fellow Barry girl herself, says, Cat, do you still fly from Cardiff Airport?
I do. I'm the chief flying instructor for Aero's flight training at Cardiff. You'll usually see me buzzing around in a little white twin-engine aeroplane, Jane. The DA-42 is my normal training equipment these days, although I do still fly the little Pipers as well for PPL training and for trial lessons. But a lot of my work now is on the twins.
Fantastic. Let's see. We've got there's so many questions. Jack Moore says, hi, Cat. My question is that with your vast experience of the industry's highs and lows, when recruitment does open up again at BA, do you see them continuing to hire cadets from a modular background?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if everybody will understand what a modular background means. There are 3 different ways of getting your frozen ATPL. And these days, everybody gets a frozen ATPL as opposed to a commercial pilot's license. So the first way is to do it ad hoc, to go and, get a PPL, go somewhere else and, just fly airplanes for fun. And then later on, get your commercial pilot's license, your instrument rating, and all that sort of thing. And you just do them as and when you want, where you want. Airlines don't like that way. They don't think that person will have sufficient continuity of training. It's the cheapest way, however. The most expensive way is what's called an integrated course, and that's operated by about 4 large training schools, one at Oxford, one down in Bournemouth, just a few dotted here and there. And for that one, you typically will join the course and spend 9 months without touching an aeroplane, doing the technical course. So for 14 technical exams. And then you will start flying the airplane, and you'll go through PPL level training, but won't necessarily ever get a PPL. And then more advanced training, hour building, and all of it is done, in a very structured way. And that was always the way that the airlines favoured. And when the airlines were sponsoring cadets, which they haven't done for some time now, that was what they all bought, was an integrated course. In between those two, you've got the modular type courses, and that's what we do at Aeros. And it's the same course content as both of the other methods. A PPL, hour building, a whole bunch of technical exams, and then back to training for your commercial pilot's license, your multi-engine piston, your multi-engine instrument rating, and then you carry on and do jet orientation and multi-crew cooperation and advanced upset recovery. And those are the modules in a modular course. And the difference between that and doing it yourself is that you do it all with one school. So you get a lot of continuity of training and a lot of continuity of standards. And the airlines have discovered that the output from a modular course is every bit as good as the output from an integrated course. So yes, I think they will definitely be taking modular students. I think they're going to be really short of pilots quite quickly.
Wow. Hopefully that answers your question there, Jack.
Yeah.
Let's see. We've got some other... Now, I think it's probably been answered. But Ken's asked, do you still fly? I think we've already answered that question. But he also asked, which aircraft that you haven't flown would you like to have had a go in?
I suppose when I was a kid, I always fancied fast jets. My legs are too long to have gone in a Lightning or a Gnat. And I'm back in the era when it was Gnats for advanced flight training. So I couldn't have flown the Gnat. They might have said, if you're good enough for fast jets, we'll bung you in a Hunter.
Oh, wow.
And then into a fast jet other than the Lightning. The Harrier always appealed. The Jaguar always appealed, because it's a very nimble and very small aeroplane.
It's a lovely plane. It really is. It's one of my
Yeah.
favorites in terms of
Yeah.
look. It just looks really nice.
One of my first officers told a wonderful tale of Red Flag, and he was in a flight of 4 Jaguars, and they've got this wonderful replay system where they can pinpoint any spatial coordinate and time and
Okay.
play it back on the debrief screens. So there they all were in the debrief, and this pair of F-16 pilots said, can you play such and such a time frame at such and such a location? And there's the 4 Jaguars on their way to some strike mission, and in behind them slot the pair of F-16s and claim 4 kills. And the Jaguar pilots turn to them and say, could you actually show us the same time frame but a mile further back? Because it wasn't a flight of 4, it was a flight of 6 Jaguars, and the 2 were detached about 1.5 miles, 2 miles behind the 4, specifically to kill any F-16s that popped into the gap.
Wow.
And they did before the F-16s got their shots off.
Oh, brilliant.
So the Jaguar was really much more competent than people give it credit for.
Mm.
And the one I've always had little respect for is the Tornado.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's going to hurt Ian.
It is. I've got one sat here.
The Tornado was a fine ground attack aeroplane, but the person who thought it could be used as a fighter, as an interceptor, wants their bumps felt.
Oh, that's going to sting, isn't it, Ian? Like,
Yeah, I love that plane.
Ian's a big lover of the Tornado.
No,
So
I'm
Ian,
sorry, the Tonka should have stayed digging holes in the fields.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually inclined to agree with you in a lot of ways there, Cat, to be quite honest. It wasn't built for intercepting and dogfighting or anything like that, where it was it was definitely a bomber.
So, I mean, I suppose the ones I do currently yearn to fly, and I've got some prospects of it in the not too distant future, are warbirds rather than those sort of military jets.
Yeah.
Military jets, I would love to get my hands on Dad's Vampire.
Wow. Yeah,
but
that'd be cool.
I've got a friend. He was one of my students. He was actually the first student I took from first flight to PPL. And I asked him what he wanted to do in his aviation career, and he said, "I'm going to fly and display Spitfires." And he's got a business which is proving to be successful enough that he's currently owns a Piston Provost and a Chipmunk.
Wow.
His next purchases are going to be a Harvard.
Oh, okay.
From then on, he'll be looking at Spitfires and probably Sea Furies and all the other associated heavy metal.
Yeah, wicked.
He did at one point ask me to be his head of training on it. So
We'll see you buzzing around the Spitfire soon then.
so I might just get my hands on a Sea Fury or
wicked.
maybe
That'd be
maybe a Mustang.
Two-seater, I'll take it. Because I'll jump in as well. I'd love me a flight in one of them, but yeah, you're trying to find one nowadays. It's so expensive to even have like the experience to do it. So it's
and I have had a back seat answering Gale. I had a back seat in a Hawk. It was painted red, and it wasn't on display. It was on a training flight. Anybody that back seats with the red arrows has to fly a non-display flight first to make sure they're not a honker. And it was with Wing Commander Admin in what was effectively Red 10. And we did a low-level NavX through the Welsh countryside, around the Mac Loop.
Wow.
Wicked.
That was great fun. I was an air cadet officer at the time, and we got a really good relationship with the Reds when they were based at Kemble. And they all of a sudden it all fell to bits. I got this reciprocal deal in place that the Air Force was not a very pleasant place for the pilots at the time, and I got the Reds flights on my 737, and in exchange I got this one flight in the back of a Hawk around Wales, with the prospect of a display flight, but it never came off in the end. But I wasn't that disappointed. The Mac Loop was good fun.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Yeah, wow.
Mm.
That was an
I
experience.
will just say there's a lot of people laughing at what you've said about the tornado and Ian's reaction. There's lots of people laughing because they can see the tornado in Ian's background, and they're just laughing at the fact that you just turned around and went, "It's not a great plane."
No, I mean, no, I did qualify it. The Tornado GR was what the airplane was built for. It's a bomber, for crying out loud.
Yeah,
You know, in the Second World War, it would have qualified as a heavy bomber.
yeah.
But nobody would send a Lancaster up to be a fighter. Why would we send a Tornado up to try and pretend?
Right.
It's
I think you need to calm yourself down, Cat. Now.
Yeah, Ian's getting mad now. He's going to start turning into the Hulk.
Again, I've got little tears in the corner of my eyes now.
Well, I noticed the one behind you is painted green. It's, you know, at least you haven't tried to put the pale grey one up there.
Oh no, actually, I lied. That it's actually German.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Yeah, it's one of the German Tiger Meat airplanes. It's a lovely thing, to be quite honest.
he'll take it down now for next week.
It won't be there next week. No, I'll put my Fuji Dreams 172 thing back up again.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
but I mean, other warbirds I'd love to get my hands on. I've flown a Beech 18.
Oh wow.
That was a great experience, and it was when I was a cadet pilot.
Yeah.
And it's not in my logbook, unfortunately. It was unloggable but extra experience of instrument flying. We used to fly this blooming thing at night from Inverness to Paris, full of lobsters.
Wow.
So we were delivering shellfish to the French gourmets. So that was good experience, good practice for an instrument rating test that's coming up. And I had the chance to fly a Beech 18 again about 5 years ago when I first retired. It was Betty the Beech, which is the airplane that was flying Phil and Ali Dunnington around the world so that they could fly their balloon in as many countries as possible. And Phil, bless him, died a few months ago. But they managed something like 50 or 60 countries in this balloon.
Wow.
Which I presume it was Phil's bucket list because he already knew he was very unwell at that stage.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a shame.
Yeah, that is a shame. Well, I'm just trying to think of the comments here. It's still people are just absolutely loving it. Visions International with a very interesting comment here saying, "This is stunning stuff. Concorde short haul service. Wow. We need to interview Cat for our Heathrow magazine. Would you be up for that?"
Yes, of course, absolutely.
There you go, Ken. All you got to do is contact Cat. She'll be well up for an interview for the magazine. So that hopefully,
feel free.
Fingers crossed that will happen. So, yeah,
feel free to share my email.
There you go. We'll get your socials up and everything else, and we'll chat to Ken off air as well. So we'll make that happen. Right, an interesting question from Will Feely, who asks, "What's your opinion on the best air show in the UK to attend this year?"
God, yeah, I'm the wrong person to ask that. I'm so out of touch with the air show circuit. I mean, I would have said that the best air show in general is probably RIAT, but is it even going on this year?
I believe it is.
Well, if it is, then RIAT.
Yeah, I believe it is. There's quite a few that I know that I would have gone to, like Yeovilton, which have sadly cancelled again this year.
Most have, haven't they?
Yeah, most of them have again. So Fairford seems to be like the one to go to. Mark Bannister asks, "Have you seen our vampire in the South Wales Air Museum, Cat?"
Yes, I have. Yeah, I've somewhere in my wallet, I've got an annual season ticket to the South Wales Aviation Museum, which is developing beautifully. They're getting a fantastic range of aircraft there, and I fondled the vampire lovingly.
Last time I went to Wales, I was actually planning to go there, but the day that I arrived was the only day it was open, and I was like, "Oh, that's a bit unfortunate." But I believe they've got an ex-Cathay Pacific 747 cockpit in there.
They have, yeah. I've been certainly crawling all over that. It's 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 in reasonable condition, but it's nice to be able to just stand there with perhaps some other guests and just say this is what this does, and this is the order that they would have gone around the panel to set it up. Funnily enough, I got a vague prospect of a captain's seat on a new 747-400 executive jet this evening, just before coming on show. So I'm hoping that might come to something tomorrow, because I would dearly love to get my hands back on a 747.
Yeah, God. Excuse me. That's pretty cool. Ken Carr asks a very specific question. Do you know how many hours you flew?
Yeah, 31,000, or bar about 70 at the last counting.
There you go.
30,930, I think, when I checked this evening, of which 15,500 were on 747s.
Wicked. So half of your hours were on
Literally,
747, and the rest
exactly,
was just all scattered.
Exactly half, yeah.
Fantastic.
A lot of the rest on other Boeings. So.
Probably know the answer to this question, but we're going to ask it anyway because Jane loves the Emirates A380. She says, have you flown the A380? Or have you flown on the A380?
Again, I have flown on the A380. Not very often. Had a good look round it when I did fly on it. It's an astonishing piece of equipment, but I'm Boeing through and through. If somebody broke my leg, they'd find the words Boeing through the long bones like a stick of rock.
We don't advise that. We're just going to put that up there. We don't condone any violence, but...
What about the differences between the 747-400 and the 800? Were you never tempted to move over onto 800 before you did retire? Was that an option?
Well, British Airways never got them, so
this is a good point. Yeah.
I mean, if they had got them, I'd have been on it like a shot.
Yeah.
A really good friend of mine, a skipper for UPS, flies both the 400 and the 800, so they do cross-operate those two, which is. It would be an interesting cross operation, but it's certainly a feasible one.
Yeah.
But she loves them.
Yeah. Fantastic. Have you ever flown in the cockpit of one? And
Not
any differences? Have you never done that? No. Never experienced it.
I mean, I've seen the differences. I mean, the glass cockpit has improved.
Yeah.
The vertical situation indicator is a really useful extra tool.
Right.
But a lot of it is easy to cross over from one to the other. Even the engines, which theoretically have no bleed in their application on the 787, they've had to put a bleed on it because the rest of the systems haven't been changed. So we still need a pneumatic bleed on the 748. But not on the 787, which is a shame. It's a shame they couldn't have gone the full way and just used electric compressors on the 748 as well.
Yeah, it made me wonder before when you were saying about the transition across, and you were saying about the even the wing panels were different and things like that. Well, they pretty much did the same again with the 747-8, didn't they? Particularly on the wings, didn't they? And changed them again, didn't they?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, every time they've just, it's a race for more efficiency. Engine efficiency and airframe efficiency. So there's a lot of refinement on the wings. Loss of the winglets, and they've now got the swept wing tips instead, which do the same job.
We're going to ask you as well about what do you think about sort of the end of an era, isn't it, with the 4-engine jets? And everything seems to be moving to more efficient twin-engine jets now. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts on that is. We have to move with times, I suppose, don't we? But it's a big shame that some of these big planes are going to disappear, isn't it?
It's a great shame. I mean, I cried. Most of them were parked up at Cardiff. The Sunforce, 14 or 15 of them, I think, were parked up at Cardiff, and I cried every time one of them left because I knew it was going to the knackers yard.
Yeah.
I love that airplane, and I always will. It's inevitable though, because the 747 needed 170 tons of fuel to fly back from Singapore. With 170 tons, it couldn't necessarily take a full load of passengers.
Right.
So we may maybe 10 or 20 passengers short of a full load just to lift the weight off Singapore in, when it was very hot. To do the same job, a 777 takes just about 110 tons.
Yeah.
And the same number of passengers.
Yes, you can see why they do it, can't you?
It sort of says,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, actually, seeing as you've raised that point, Ian, there was a question way back, and I'm just going to see if I can find it. Somebody made a very, very good point, and I wanted to raise it, but then a whole load of questions came in, and I'm just trying to see if I can find it. This may take some time. But I believe it was something to do with... okay, right. I remember it. I won't find it, but I remember it. So somebody asked, do you think the complete retirement of the 747 was the right idea? And do you think there's a heavy reliance now on the 777?
I think it was exactly the right thing to do, unfortunately. The 747 was able to hold its own when fuel was cheap and the airframe owed nothing to anybody. But as soon as flight work became less, it became impossible to leave it sitting on the ground without retiring it.
Yeah.
And now that fuel is so expensive, it would not be flying. Even if they were still theoretically in service, the British Airways wouldn't be able to afford to fly them.
So do you think overall, in terms of if we didn't have the pandemic going on, so ultimately that's kind of what accelerated its retirement. If there was no pandemic, you think that, I think they were supposed to be retired in like 2024, I think it was, or something like that. Do you think still they would have been retired early because of the fuel prices?
Yes.
And like the fuel, the cost of fuel rising and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think they would. I think British Airways always balanced fuel costs with all the other costs of operating a particular type of aircraft on any particular route. And when fuel costs are expensive, the 747 just doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, I suppose it makes sense. It's a great shame that it never, I want to say it didn't really get the proper send-off it deserved, I think.
Yeah, I think
what they did was quite nice with the dual takeoff and stuff, but I think it deserved a lot more. It's just a shame there was a pandemic going on to kind of stop that from happening.
Yeah. The dual takeoff, of course, had particular significance. It was designed to replicate the dual arrival of the first two 747-400s.
Of course, yeah.
In 1989, they arrived. That would have been Golf Bravo November Lima Alpha and Lima Charlie.
Yeah,
the first two. One of them had Lord King on board, and the other one had Colin Marshall on board.
Wow!
And they came across the ocean from Seattle effectively in formation.
Wicked.
And Lord King came up on the flight deck and said to the chief pilot of the 747-400 fleet, if you let that other bugger land before us, you're out of a job. So although they were supposed to land absolutely simultaneously, Alan, the chief pilot, just put that little bit of extra speed at the end on finals and make sure that he got down just about 10 seconds early. So
brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Some fascinating stories. They're really some fascinating stories. Gail Leary, I think, is responding to your question. I think we didn't get to the question. I think you answered it with what planes you wanted to fly and stuff. But she says that she flew in the Chinook, sat in the Lightning, Hawk, and Sally B, which not a lot of people can boast. So,
no, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Especially in the Chinook. One of my favourite helicopters, actually, the Chinook. So I'd love to have a go in that.
The Walker.
Yeah, really, Walker. Yeah. But fantastic. Whether you might know this off the top of your head, I don't know. But Jane Harkers asks, how many go-arounds did you do, or have you done? If you can remember, like a rough figure.
This week or
this?
No, I honestly haven't got a clue, to be honest. In anger on commercial flights, a couple of dozen, maybe, I suppose. They're rarer than you may think. Go around on commercial flights these days. We can operate in such low limits, and very often we will try to convince the airport to let us operate to Cat 3 limits, even in Cat 1 conditions, because Cat 3 limits don't have a visual go-around point. Yeah. You don't have to see the runway at all. So if it's marginal whether you're going to see it at 200 feet which is the Cat 1 limit, then you want to be able to stay on instruments on an autopilot way below that so that you're assured of the landing. Mostly go-rounds are flown when the aircraft approach isn't stable, which might mean you're too fast or you're not on the right glide slope. The lowest I've done a go-round, I suppose, would be in the flare when a first officer was floating along the runway. And
Wow.
when you float along the runway, you gobble runway length. So at a particular point along the runway, I just said go round, and off we went. You can actually go around even after you've touched the ground.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
The dividing line in the British Airways Ops Manual is once reverse is selected, you may not start a go round. So that's the dividing line for us in British Airways. The last go round I did would have been last week with a student in Piper Arrow. I think he was a CPL student, and I just needed him to show me a go round.
Yeah.
So at some stage I just hollered go round, and he flew a go round very nicely for me.
So just planned, wasn't it? That planned as opposed to sort of forced upon.
Planned by me, but not by him.
No, of course. You know what I mean. Like, it's all part of the training sort of thing. It's not forced upon you, by weather or something like that. It's like you saying, right, go round, and then just executing it. And
yeah, but I mean, most pilots fly every approach to a go round, and the landing is a nice optional extra if everything's right. But every single approach, I'm thinking, I'm flying this to a go round. So it means that I don't have any reluctance to do a go round when I need to.
So you're just sort of sat waiting. You almost like sort of hand on the sort of throttle,
absolutely.
Sort of just waiting for that opportunity if you need it to then just power up and off you go.
Right down to the last. Well, right down to touching the runway. If it's not right, you've got the option to go away before it will go horribly wrong.
Yeah. Fantastic. There's some questions coming in now about the sort of thing I wanted to bring up, because I know we spoke about it last time, and I know lots of people will probably be interested in wanting to hear about it, but we'll ask it anyway. Henry Fox says, did you ever fly into Kai Tak?
Yes, I did. I flew into Kai Tak on the classic 747 and on the 400. It was still a thing when we first got the 400. I remember the 400 had much better navigational accuracy than the classic, simply because it had laser ring gyros rather than mechanical gyros in the inertial reference units. But it wasn't perfect. It was updated by DME. We didn't have GPS fitted when we first got them, and it meant that it could be a little bit out of position. The aircraft's main navigation systems wouldn't necessarily be spot on. And coming across mainland China towards Hong Kong is really strange that every single nav aid is on an even number of minutes of latitude and longitude. So there's never a decimal. So that they're only surveyed to the nearest mile, basically. And that means that the updates you're getting from those radio aids could be up to a mile out of position. And they were on this occasion, and we were flying the IGS to Kai Tak, and you fly around a little island called Stonecutters Island. And we were supposed to be flying, as British Airways standard operating procedures called for, an approach where the landing pilot doesn't fly his own approach. It was called the monitored approach in short haul. It was never called that in long haul, and it was never intended to be that in long haul. But it basically just means that the pilot who's going to do the landing has got much more spare capacity to monitor overall and manage the operation during the approach.
Yeah.
Using the other pilot as an organic autopilot, if you like. The autopilot was in, but the other pilot would be concentrating on the actual flying of the approach, and the landing pilot would be managing overall the situation to give himself the maximum chance of a landing. And this one particular skipper hated this system, and the rule book said you could take control when you could see the landing airfield. But this particular skipper decided every single approach that he could see the landing airfield from top of descent. So he'd taken the airplane over and he was flying his own descent. And we were flying around this approach, and it was flipping obvious that the airplane wasn't quite where it said it was, but he wasn't noticing that. He was nudged about it, but his capacity was concentrated on flying the airplane. And we were in danger of actually hitting Stonecutters Island.
Wow.
At which point I said, I have control, and flew the airplane to a safe position, popped it back on the genuine IGS inbound track, and said, you have control. And we got on the ground and had a long debrief about that.
Yeah, I'll bet.
God, yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet. So was it, I mean, the experience of flying into Kai Tak, was it very surreal to be flying over buildings and stuff like that, sort of very low level?
You never really noticed the buildings, to be honest.
Because you're constantly looking at
you flew the IGS maybe in bad weather down until you saw the checkerboard, and then you just did a programmed turn. You turned at a given rate, which was bringing you around, and you were concentrating on the runway.
Yeah.
So you were looking at the runway as you were turning onto the center line, and you were looking at the, it would have been the Varsies in those days, which were telling you red or green whether or not you were at the right height for the distance you were out from the runway. And yeah, you flew between blocks of flats, but they were not really what you were interested in.
No. Was it, did you have like quite a few sort of sketchy turns where you didn't quite, I say, you know, not so much like yourself, but did you experience any sort of like turns that were quite sketchy and you sort of had to, I mean, would you be able to pull out from that sort of?
Oh yeah, you can always do a
turn?
go around. Yeah.
So did you experience any sort of sketchy turns that maybe weren't executed properly, or was it literally
No,
every time?
it was a very simple turn to do. There's another one that's very similar at New York called the Canarsie approach.
Yes.
So runway 13 at New York is, you can do a straight in approach in really bad weather, but it's very, very noise sensitive. It's right over the heart of Brooklyn and Queens. So we don't do it. We come in over the coast at Canarsie Naval Air Station, and which has got a VOR there, and then we follow again a pre-programmed route, straight line first of all for about 4 miles off Canarsie, and then by which stage you can see lead-in lights which lead you around the corner, so you just follow the lead-in lights around. And one of them is about 1.5 miles further, so you always tend to be really low on the approach for one of them.
Yeah.
And at the right place on the other one. Of course, the one British Airways uses is always the one which is a bit trickier, the one which you're always low on the approach, because it lands us right next to our own terminal.
Yeah, I remember we spoke to, I'm trying to think of who we spoke. We did speak to another pilot who told us exactly about that approach and how you were sort of slightly lower than Kai Tak, I think, on that approach.
Yeah.
Whether it's just purely because you were over land for Kai Tak and you're over the sort of...
No, it's because, I say that the two runway 13s, one of them is 1.5 miles or so further away.
Yeah.
The width of the runway is further away from Canarsie, but the initial approach from Canarsie puts you at the same height at the break-off point where you've got to complete the approach visually. So at that point, you're going to be 1.5 miles. You're going to be about 450 feet too low for one of the approaches. Yeah. And what normally happens is people tend to fly level until they're at the right height, but then they let themselves get high. So you start off low, you end up high, and it's just all over the place, that approach. It's not my favorite. It's interesting, but it's certainly not my favorite approach.
No.
I think the most challenging approach I've ever flown was Funchal.
Oh, of course. Yeah, Madeira. Yeah.
Funchal in the 737-200. That's truly challenging. It's not only is it a curved approach where you've got to pass a banana packing shed at 600 feet, then follow a row of poles, but at around about 300 feet, you pass the mouth of a valley. It's called Point Rosario. And when they're giving you winds, they're going to give you a wind at touchdown, a wind at the far end of the runway, and a wind at Point Rosario. And there's always this cold wind funneling down the valley, which just gives you this burst of crosswind at 1 mile away from the runway, which is exactly where you don't need it.
No.
But,
great, yeah.
Yeah, Funchal was always a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, that's crazy. I know we talk about this because obviously, like say, Henry Fox mentioned it, but I know Gail Leary was also asking about the most precarious landing and takeoff that you ever done. So in terms of like the landing side of things, we know about like Funchal and Kai Tak and the Canesi approach at New York. What have you ever had like a really sketchy sort of takeoff or anything along those lines, or has it all been like routine?
Yeah, one in particular stands out, and it was Funchal again. I flew the very first British Air Tour 737-200 flight to Funchal, and we were planned to come back via Porto Santo, which is just a very short hop from Funchal. So you load up with passengers at Funchal, but you can't get the fuel on because of the length of the runway as it was then. They've extended the runway out over the sea now on struts, but it wasn't at that stage. So the idea was you took off from Funchal, flew 20 or 30 miles to Porto Santo, landed there, filled up with fuel, and then flew back to Gatwick. But we were on the ground at Funchal, myself and the management captain that was with me. I was the first officer. And I worked out the takeoff figures, and I said, Alan, we can actually get back to Gatwick in one go.
Yeah.
Oh, he said, that's interesting. And he cross-checked my figures, and he said, yeah, I agree, we can. Let's do that. So we popped on the fuel, and we took off, and we sort of sagged off the end of the runway like a catapult takeoff from an aircraft carrier. And Funchal's about 200 feet above sea level, so we had about 200 feet we could drop off the end of the runway to accelerate and climb away. But it was interesting. And 2 days later, I got a phone call from this skipper, and he said, Cat, do you realize we were, or you don't realize, but I'm going to tell you now, we were 2 tons overweight on that takeoff.
Wow.
Which with 2 tons is nothing for a 747, but for a little 737-200, it's substantial.
Yeah.
And I said, my God, did I get the figures wrong? He said, no, you didn't. He said, I cross-checked them and I agreed with yours exactly, but the books were wrong.
No.
So what we got on the 737-200 and a lot of other Boeings is the ability to increase your takeoff weight by switching off the air conditioning for takeoff. And there are 2 ways in which the old paper calculations could present that information to the pilots. When it's really critical, they would have a page for air conditioning on and a page for air conditioning off. And each temperature you would work out would be the exact figure. When it wasn't quite so critical, they'd have what was called an air conditioning off correction.
Mm-hmm.
But that correction isn't linear. The actual correction, if you look at the 2 separate pages, it's like a curve. So at the worst case scenario, there may be a thousand kilos of improvement for switching the air conditioning off. But at other temperatures, it will be much more than that. So if it's critical, you're going to use these 2 separate pages. They're going to provide the 2 separate pages, and you may get 2 tons of extra from flying packed on at certain temperatures.
Yeah.
When it's not so critical, they just provide you with 1 page with the air conditioning off correction, but it always has to reflect that worst case. So in that case that I've just given you, it would only be a 1 ton correction for every temperature, and you just do without the extra benefit at the better temperatures. What they've done is they've given us the correction, but it wasn't the worst case correction.
Yeah.
And it meant that the temperature we were at, we were well overweight for that takeoff. We should have gone to Porto Santo.
Yeah.
But the figures were right according to the information we got. But the guys that produced the paperwork had done the wrong correction. They'd given us the wrong linear correction, one for a much more favorable temperature than the temperature we had.
Wow.
So yeah, that was probably the sketchiest takeoff I've ever had.
Can I ask you what difference does it make with the air conditioning? What's different about air conditioning on and air conditioning off? I don't quite understand that.
The air conditioning is run by taking high pressure air off the engines.
Right. Okay.
At usually some sort of an intermediate stage compressor. If that air isn't being taken off, then it is being pushed into the rest of the engine and produces more power.
Oh, right.
So by taking air conditioning bleeds off, it's the bleeds that are on or off.
Yeah.
By taking that bleed air, you lose just a small proportion, but enough to make 2 tons of takeoff.
Yeah, enough to make a difference. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, right. That's interesting. I was listening to what you were saying. I didn't quite understand what difference it were making, to be quite honest. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That.
Yeah, I mean, if you turn the air conditioning on in a car, you lose power.
Yeah, that's true. You do,
cool.
yeah.
And it's the same basic idea, and it's the exact idea that the 787 hasn't got. So they don't take any bleed air off that engine.
Right.
So they've always got maximum efficiency into that engine.
Yeah.
Whereas most high bypass aircraft, somewhere in the intermediate compressor stage, they will take a substantial bleed off. And in fact, there's a high pressure and a low pressure bleed on the RB211 engines, the Trents and everything. And that will take a bleed off the low pressure stage when you're at high throttle settings, but when you close the throttle, there's not enough pressure at that bleed, so they'll then take it off a higher pressure bleed further into the engine.
Okay, right, yeah.
But it comes off the engine, obviously it's high pressure and it's hot.
Yeah.
So at that stage, it's ready to use for pneumatics, but it's not ready to use for air conditioning. So it then goes through a thing called an air conditioning pack.
Yeah.
And that pack cools and conditions the air and then pumps it into the cabin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's all right. We'll just go through a couple of questions that we've got here. Like I said, we've had so many questions literally coming through to ask you, and then we'll sort of jump on to a little bit more. I know we're sort of an hour and 45 minutes in. We're going well at the moment. We're doing really well at the moment. But a couple of questions, sort of simple like yes and no's and stuff. Ken Carr is simply asking, when you refer to the classic 747s, is that the 100 and 200s?
Yeah, it's exactly that, Ken, as far as British Airways is concerned. The 300 would have been a classic as well. It was all of the 747s that had a flight engineers panel.
So one thing I will ask you, just I am curious. Obviously, the British Airways obviously operated the 100 and 200. Not saying that you might know the reason for it, but why do you think they jumped to the 400 instead of having the 300 as well?
The 200 was doing the work it needed. The 300 didn't have any significant advantages for us for our operation over the 200, but the 400 did. So we literally just jumped from one to the other. The 400 was already,
need for it.
No, the 400 was already in the offing when the 300 became available. So we just waited.
Because I think a lot of people see or may not know that the 300 wasn't a successful variant of the 747. It's always the 100, 200s. And the 400s that get thought about, but the 300, whilst there was some around, like major airlines did have them,
they weren't
a massive success.
No, they weren't. In exactly the same way as the old original 100 SP. The 100 SP was a shortened version of the 100 for extra long range.
Yeah.
But while the SP was in development, Rolls-Royce had come up with the RB211 fit, which produced the 200, and the 200 had better range in its full length version than the SP did with the old Pratt & Whitney JT9s in its shortened SP version. So everything the SP could offer, the 200 could offer, but with a full cabin, an extra 100 people.
There you go, more plane and more to offer at the same time.
I noticed one from Ashley Williams there. Do I think electric airplanes will become a thing? I sincerely hope so. I think it's going to be a while before we see them carrying very many passengers, but I think we'll see fairly short haul and small aircraft use of electric aircraft within the next decade. I think routes like the Orkney services, Westray to Papa Westray in 90 seconds, especially with the fact that places like offshore islands in Scotland have a surfeit of electricity from renewable sources and no way of getting it to the mainland. So the Hebrides, for instance, are talking about using all their surplus electricity to generate hydrogen. They've got to use it on the islands until there's an interconnector to the mainland. And the UK government doesn't seem to want an interconnector to the mainland for some reason. So there's every prospect for niche markets like that fairly quickly. I think mainline short and long haul is going to take a lot longer. Because we simply haven't got the battery technology yet, or any other method of easy storage. We may find that alternative fuels I mean, British Airways have now got a contract to fly on McDonald's chip fat.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of ways of trying to make aviation cleaner and greener. And yeah, I'm sure that electric will be part of that. I noticed the name Will Feely a little earlier on, although I don't think we've answered his question. But Will is the UK president of the Tesla Owners Group.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I have a Tesla. I've been driving a Tesla for the last 6 years and 150,000 miles. So I'm a great believer in electric vehicle technology, and I would have loved to get my hands on that airplane that got the speed record recently.
Yeah, is it? It's in America, isn't it? They've got an electric plane. Is it called Alice? I think.
I don't know. Is it? I'm thinking of the one they made in Gloucester.
It's something that looks very hideous that they've built purely for like electric. But I'm fairly certain it's called. Alice.
Is that the one with about 10 ducted fans on each wing? There is one which has got.
Do you know what? I'm that curious now. I'm going to have to probably do a very, very quick Google search.
I'll leave you to that one.
Yeah.
No, the one I was talking about was the Rolls-Royce record breaker, the one that was built in Gloucester. And they're next door to us in Gloucester with the Aeros in Gloucester. And I kept saying, I'm very used to electric propulsion. I'm quite happy to come and fly your airplane for you, but they never bit.
Right, I've got the. Let me just. No, can't do it that way. Of course not. Let me see if I can do it this way. It's a bit better. Right, let me just. I'm going to briefly show it. We're not going to go too far into it, but I'll briefly show it because we've got some other bits and bobs to go into. So, right, this is what I was talking about. This is what I've seen from America. Is this?
Oh, right. Well, that's quite an interesting looking thing. It looks a bit like the Pinocchio, doesn't it?
This is a small commuter plane, I believe, that they're flying around and testing, and it has actually flown. Yeah, if that's the way, I'm all about looks, you see, when it comes to planes. So I think it looks hideous, but if it's a step in the right direction to make aviation more sustainable,
well, I like it personally.
all the power to them.
I think it's quite a nice looking thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what Alice is, what I was referring to. But yeah, it is what it is. But if it makes aviation more sustainable in the future, and it's the I can't think what it is. If it's the first thing that will trigger everything, go for it. I'm for it. So at least that's something. Right, let me get back onto what I was originally sharing, which was this, but we'll go on to that shortly because we'll go to some comments here. So Will Feely, who's actually still watching, says, thanks, Cat, great podcast. So thank you for the comment.
Thanks, Will.
And then we have a comment here from Kaz Barrett, who says, evening, Cat.
Yeah, so Kaz is another Barry girl. She does the most amazing impression of Nessa from.
Hence, yeah, all right, yeah, I get it. Yeah, hence
what's occurring type thing.
Yeah.
But she actually does that to open supermarkets and things. But,
I see. I've seen now whether the Nessa's in the name as well. That makes sense.
Yeah,
brilliant, fantastic.
Yeah. Nice to see you, Kaz.
So I want to kind of jump onto some little bits that you've done before. I think I know about it. Ian knows about it. I think we spoke about it before, but maybe not a lot of people know about it. There was a program. I can't remember. I still, for the life of me, I know we spoke about it before. I can't remember what channel it was on. It was on the BBC channel. And I want to say it was BBC
4, weren't it?
2 or 4? One of the two?
Might have been 2.
4 nights it ran for. Can't. Do you know what? For the life of me, Ian, just do some research quickly.
Yeah, we'll do.
Just while we jump onto it, anyway. Anyway, you were the expert on Plane Spotting Live.
Yeah, I was the only one who was unscripted on Plane Spotting
Unscripted,
Live.
yes. I remember that from the last time we spoke about this.
Yeah.
I want to kind of talk about how the whole thing came to. Were you in the know about how like it was going to be coming together, or were you just given the invite of you're going to be the expert and the others are just going to sort it out, and you sort of were like, oh, okay, that's fair enough?
Yeah, I was just invited on once the concept was in place. I was invited on about, gosh, what would it have been? 3 months before the program went out. and was a consultant for them from that point on. But I didn't really have any input into the format. Script meetings every morning were hilarious because initially they said, well, do we need to invite Cat to the script meeting because she hasn't got a script? And we were busy sort of sorting out the auto cues for Andy Peters and Peter Snow. And they'd say, well, what we're going to have to do, Cat, is when we see an aeroplane on approach, we'll cut to you and you can tell us what's going on the flight deck. And I had an earpiece in, one of the little curly tail ones at the back. And they said, we'll give you a countdown when we need you to hand it back to Andy or to Peter. So I was literally, I'd literally be saying, that they're 5 miles now, they're coming through 1,500 feet. By this stage, the gear's already down, but they're thinking about taking the final stage of flap, coming back to their final approach speed. And, I'd literally be commentating the whole approach down to touchdown. And as soon as it was on the ground, they'd say, we're going back to Peter in 5, 4, 3, and I'd still be talking through this as they're going along their own way, and I'd say, and then back to you, Peter, or something like that. But Peter was an absolute gentleman. We'd finish up the show at 9 o'clock every evening, and we'd be straight back to the bar in the local hotel and sit there putting the world to rights over gin and tonic.
Yeah, so we spoke about it yesterday, and we were like, oh, probably went back for a cup of tea, and you're like, no, definitely stronger with Peter Snow. Like he don't just do cups of teas; he does a lot stronger than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I right in saying from the last show that you and I did, is it Andy Peters is quite an av geek?
Yeah, well, he certainly claimed to be an av geek. He made a few serious gaffes on the program, but
I remember those as well.
Yeah, I think his excuse at the time was that he was really interested in it all, but hadn't really done anything about it up until then. But I wouldn't be surprised to find that he'd followed up on his interest since then.
What was the experience like being on the show sort of thing, and almost sort of giving the hobby of plane spotting a bit more of a platform, especially on a BBC channel? Like, what was the experience to be able to do that?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I love working live to camera anyway. I work with the BBC and ITV here in Wales. If they've got a particular news item that they want me to comment on, they'll sometimes tell me, don't read the news, Cat. We need your reaction to asking you the question about something. And that might be about aviation. It might be about diversity work. It might be about any of the subjects that they know I'm good at. And they will rely on me to do it live to camera. And I'd far prefer to do it live than recorded. Because when you do it live, they can't edit you and get you completely out of context with what you've said. I'll do it in a single take to camera for them then to edit. And that usually works out at 20 minutes in front of a camera for 20 seconds on screen. But if I can get them to do it live, I would do it that way every single time.
And of course, no better setting to film it at than the Aero Park at East Midlands.
It was great fun, yeah. But really fabulous bunch of characters there at the Aero Park. Yeah,
some really, really good characters. I remember, I think it's last summer I went there, and there's some like volunteers and things like that. And I think I went in. I think I had a Vulcan T-shirt. I think I went in a Vulcan T-shirt, and one of the guys actually spotted it and it just lectured me on the Vulcan. And it was really fascinating to hear. And of course, they've got one there at the park as well. So he just completely lectured me on it in terms of what the plane was like and things like that. And I was just like, yeah, do you know what? That's really cool, because I didn't ask for that, but it's really cool to hear about.
Yeah, they love to share their knowledge.
They love it. They love it. And I actually got followed by the Argosy fan club sort of thing that they're trying to sort of come together to kind of maintain the plane and things like that. They actually followed me after I put a video up on my channel from the Aero Park and just showing off the exhibits there, and they loved it and were like, would you be able to kind of just help out with trying to sort of maintain the plane and stuff? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, like anything to get, like, because it's a lovely looking thing that you're sort of stood behind. It's a lovely plane, but I just think it for me at least, it looks like it could be sort of loved a little bit more, but that's my own personal opinion.
That's my opinion on most museum exhibits, and I know that SWAM are obviously here tonight. It's really difficult to give an airplane in a static exhibit the love and care it needs. I've got fantastic respect for any museum that does take good care of its exhibits, but I've seen an awful lot of museums where they don't. And the airplanes deteriorate ever so quickly. As somebody mentioned, Concorde at Heathrow was left to rot, basically.
Dreadful. Yeah, we mentioned that yesterday, didn't we? And I think Steve was also the one to mention it as well, saying it was just left in a horrific condition. But yeah, I mean, they can only do so much with what they've got, I think, is probably the best way of putting it. It's like trying to manage.
When all's said and done, these museums are pretty much always run by volunteers on a limited budget.
Yeah.
And they do the best they can. I don't think any of these museums start off with the object of collecting a bunch of scrap aeroplanes.
Yeah.
They start off with the object of displaying these airplanes to their best advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they can maintain the enthusiasm of the volunteers and an income stream, then they do a very good job of it. If, on the other hand, the enthusiasm wanes, then they're going to end up with a bunch of neglected exhibits.
Yeah, it's a shame. We don't want to really be seeing the exhibits in that condition either. And Jim Gemmel's putting it nicely in saying that the least said about Alpha Charlie at Heathrow, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a shame what they've done with it, really. But,
yeah, I mean, but on the other hand, you look at some Concordes around the world, and they are loved exhibits. I mean, the one in Barbados has got this fabulous air-conditioned building it's in. I think the one at East Fortune's been quite well looked after.
Yeah.
There are some really good examples of Concorde around, but the one at Heathrow is not one of them.
No, definitely not. Andrew Grist pops by and says, "Evening, Cat. Interesting to hear that new technology is being developed that will eventually replace the ILS system we've all known since the 60s.
Yeah, so, of course, Britain took a big step back from that recently. The technology is GPS-based. It's GNSS-based, so not just GPS, but GLONASS and Galileo and all of them. But it has to be augmented. If you just take GPS, it doesn't have sufficient integrity monitoring to fly to the same limits as instrument landing system, nor does it have the same accuracy as instrument landing system, particularly if you take it below Cat 1 limits down to autoland type limits. So it needs to have a wide area or a local area augmentation system. And the usual one is called space-based augmentation system, SBAS. And when we came out of the EU and out of EASA, unfortunately, Britain wouldn't pay to maintain that SBAS access in the UK airspace. So if I go to Jersey or Guernsey, I can fly an SBAS approach in one of my training aeroplanes, absolutely down to ILS limits with no ground-based aid. It's just using all of the various satellites plus space-based augmentation. And if I fly to Cardiff, I can't. I can fly an approach using the GPS systems, but I can't use the space-based augmentation system to give me the integrity monitoring and the accuracy that I need for an ILS quality approach, which is a shame.
It'd be interesting if it does transition over to something a little bit more modern, I think, especially considering...
It is transitioning. There's no two ways about that. We're losing a lot of ground-based radio navigation aids like VORs, VHF omnidirectional radio ranges. The closest one to me is up at Brecon. There's, they're dotted around the country, but there were well over 100 in the UK. There are still a fair number of those, but most of them have been downgraded so that they're only there to serve the local airfields that use them for local procedures. They're not there for en route navigation. For en route navigation, they need to work up to 40,000 feet and out to 300 miles. But most of them have been turned down in power. So, for instance, Brecon is no longer an en route aid. It's only there to service the departure routes and the arrival routes into Cardiff and Bristol. So it's not listed in the UK Air Pilot, which lists all these things, as an en route aid at all.
Yeah.
The DME part of it, the distance measuring equipment part of it, is still listed as an en route aid, but not the VOR.
Yeah.
So that's all now reliant on area navigation systems, which are basically GPS based for most people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the way it's going. The loss of SBAS to the UK was devastating. It was crazy, truly ridiculous decision.
I think probably a lot of people that have sort of been in the same position as you will probably agree, I think, with the loss of it and sort of the way that it's going. But we'll move forward with it. And
well, I was going to say, do you think it's a decision what will be turned around? I mean, if it's beneficial,
it's not only beneficial; it's an essential safety tool.
Yeah.
I one can only hope. But what's happened at the moment is that the UK have said they're going to produce a UK version of it. Now, it's not impossible that they could produce a ground-based system to augment GPS, and they could do that as what's called a local area augmentation system. And what you do for that is that each approach has got its own correction module near the runway.
Yeah.
And so when you dial up that approach, it automatically tunes the augmentation system for that runway. But it means every airfield has got to install one of these things. The wide area augmentation systems in the States, that started off as a ground-based system where the corrections were at each VOR around the country, but that still involved a lot of installations. The advantage of the space-based one is there's just one, and that's all it does is broadcast the corrections that the GPS needs. It monitors which satellites are in view of any particular place. It knows what the errors for that satellite are, and it just corrects them. I mean, the original was the Japanese invented what's called differential GPS, and they did it more as a challenge than anything. The Americans who own GPS, they had a system called selective availability.
Okay.
And that's all that did was jiggle the time signal on the satellite so that it degraded the accuracy from about 1.6 meters to about 16 meters, and then to 160 meters. So military type GPSs could easily do the 16 meters. Civilian based ones could only do the 160 meters, which is not good enough for an approach. But they said you'll never break the encryption on this because it's got the same number of bits as a CD. So they said, you'll never break the encryption. So the Japanese just thought outside the box and thought, we don't need to break the encryption. What we're going to do is fit a GPS receiver at a known place. So, they survey to the nearest quarter of an inch the position that they put this fixed ground GPS receiver. It would then receive the signals from GPS and find out what error the Americans were introducing. And it would send that error as a correction to every other GPS in range. So that was differential GPS. And they could get past the selective availability and give civilian GPSs with this differential correction accuracy to within about 16 centimeters.
Wow.
So, it just threw the whole idea of jiggling the system out the window. The Americans almost immediately turned off selective availability and said, we'll never turn that on again. And and from that point on, GPS became a much more accurate and usable system.
Yeah.
But space-based is the ideal way of doing it, because you just have one correction sent down to everybody in Europe, but it tells you what the correction is for where you are. And without it, we're hamstrung in the UK.
Yeah.
It's really.
It's
It's sad, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really
Got one question that I'll throw at you from Gail Leary, and then we'll sort of move to the last sections of the show.
No, I've never been to Sharjah, Gail.
There you go. She says it's amazing. I'm very certain it is, with probably
I'm sure it is.
vast array of aircraft that they probably have there.
Yeah.
But at least that answers that question.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some very strange airplanes in some very strange parts of the world. I was on the ground in Antananarivo in Madagascar. I was passengering out to where was I passengering out to? It was to Mauritius. For some reason, we'd had a passenger, a crew out, And we started off in Nairobi and caught this flight with Air Comoros, which stopped in Moroni in the Comoro Islands and Antananarivo on the way to Mauritius. And it was back in the days when you could go outside and sit having a beer in the sun, on a terrace on an airfield with just a fence between you and the aircraft. And we were just watching everything go on. And all of a sudden there was this enormous noise as a couple of MiG-21s buzzed the airfield.
Oh, wow.
But,
wow. That's pretty. Yeah, that must have been quite a sight to see those as well. Like just buzz the airfield like top speed as well. Yeah, amazing. Wow.
Yeah, and they were local Air Force. The Madagascar Air Force.
Wow, they just wicked. That's really really cool. Gail Leary says, "Thank you for answering our questions. It's been very informative of your answers." So, that's what.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Always is.
Yeah. Cat loves the questions. She loves the questions.
Well, it's because I don't do one-word answers. This is the thing.
No, absolutely.
Every question you ask is absolutely likely to trigger yet another answer.
Not. We'll go on to. We've got two more topics that I want to touch. One we'll save at the very end, but there's a picture that I've got on my screen which I'm going to bring up now.
Good Lord.
That you showed us, last night actually when we were chatting before today, and this was a picture taken from your I say retirement flight, but this is when I can't. My memory's really bad. The destination of this place was
Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic. It was a trip I'd requested. I'd had an official retirement trip to Hong Kong, which was effectively my retirement trip for my friends and colleagues at Heathrow. This one was for my friends and colleagues at Gatwick, and although I wasn't entitled to another retirement trip to a place of my choice, I was senior enough that I could just bid for it and get it. But Gatwick rostering were brilliant, and they put absolutely everybody on that crew I knew and was friendly with, and we had an absolute ball in Punta Cana in a fabulous hotel that we stay out there. And that was my arrival, and that had all been arranged without my knowledge by my first officer.
Yeah, and like you've just touched upon as well, you had no idea that that you were going to get such a nice little send off from the guys at Punta Cana on your retirement. You did it just happened, and I suppose it took you by surprise.
And the photo and a video to go with it were taken by the station manager at Punta Cana. So he was standing on our parking stand watching us come in and taking those photos for us.
Fantastic. And obviously, emotionally, how did you feel at this point in terms of, the, having this sort of nice little water cannon salute to say, thank you.
Oh, it was lovely.
For everything that you've done. Did it sort of, did it hit somewhere a little bit, or was it a case of you stay professional? I'd
spent the preceding month flying my last flight into all sorts of different places, and I had absolutely fantastic crews on every single flight I did, not just for the last couple of months, but the last 5 years of my career, I suppose, were the best 5 years of my life.
So do you have this picture sort of as a treasure now? Do you treasure this particular picture as like you've seen it from the outside of the cockpit? Because I suppose you see it, but as you go through it, I mean, you don't get to see the picture you've just seen on the screen here. So I imagine
it was very nice that somebody taken that photo and sent it to us. It's definitely a treasured photo.
Fantastic. And I suppose, did you fly back to Gatwick after that?
Yeah, we had 4 days on the ground, I think, at Punta Cana, which the hotel is phenomenal. It has an adults only end, which is where the crew go. It's completely all inclusive for the captain, the first officer, and the cabin service manager, which is the chief cabin crew member at Gatwick. We get premium drinks included. For the rest of the crew, they've got to slum it on own label vodka and the such like, but unlimited food. All of the restaurants are included, and there are 15 restaurants on site, I think, but 4 in the adults only end, and then another 11 or so down at the families end, which is a 20-minute walk through the accommodation. It's enormous, this site. There's a little train that runs you from one end to the other if you can't be bothered with the walk. but fantastic bars, restaurants, all sorts going on. There's a sushi bar, there's a teppanyaki restaurant, there's a gaucho steak restaurant, there's a Chinese restaurant, an Indian restaurant. One of the ones down at the adults only end is a superb French gourmet restaurant. I always make sure that the crew get booked in there, and then I buy the wine in that restaurant because that isn't all inclusive. The wine list in there is fabulous. And because there are then 12 of us, it gives me the opportunity to actually buy wine for each course and choose a good wine for each course, including something that most people have never even tasted, which is dessert wine to go with pudding. A really good Sauterne or something at the end of the meal. And you realize that drinking the red wine through your pudding, even if it is chocolate, makes the red wine taste sour. Whereas if you drink a Sauterne at the end of the meal, which is sweet and would be sickly in any other context, as soon as you've got a mouthful of some rich, sticky pudding, adding some Sauterne to it just makes sense. It's like drinking liquid sunshine.
Yeah, I'll bet. So this is like a treasured memory for you then, in terms of, you said to us, and we don't need to sugarcoat it, you went out 4 days partying, didn't you, basically?
Pretty much, yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I got some pretty good photos of that as well, but they're not for sharing.
No, I'm here, we're not.
Just a quick one, Cat. What's probably been, you've been all over the world, the most unusual thing what somebody's plonked in front of you as a meal?
Oh gosh,
we're not talking about food, are we?
Yeah,
that's a dangerous thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go with it anyway. Go on.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that wants to try everything.
Right.
Snake restaurant in Hong Kong, bring it on. Chilled monkey brains as a dessert.
Oh,
yeah, happy with that. Wichita grubs in Australia. Yeah, they're okay. They taste a bit like nuts, but they're okay. You name it, I'll try it. I might not especially want to go back and have a second helping, but I'll try it.
Yeah, all right.
Wow. Yeah, I mean,
fearless.
That whole thing itself, in terms of where you've been and like cuisine and stuff. We can go on for hours about that. Like I said,
getting handed the sheep's eye in the Middle East is always a great compliment. Of course, it's considered to be the greatest delicacy in the meal. That it gets given to the guest of honor, and it's a fantastic compliment to have it, and it's a fantastic insult, of course, then not to pop it in your mouth and chew.
Oh yeah, can't imagine that.
Yeah. It's a bit of a catch-22, that one, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You do it anyway because it's out of respect for them.
Absolutely,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, crazy. Well, I'd like to say again, because I said this the last time, and I'll say it again today. I think we've barely scratched the surface in terms of like things to talk about. I think with Cat. So I think
it's been 53 episodes since my last visit. So let's make it a bit quicker next time.
Next week could be fine if you like.
I'm up for it. If you want Cat Part 2 next week, that's fine.
Yeah.
I know we've got a few other things you wanted to cover, like the various.
There's so many. There's honest to God, like there's so many things you could cover. Like two. I mean, we were going like 2 hours and 20 minutes. There's still so much to talk about. So, I mean, we combined with an hour and a half from last time, that's like 4 hours of chat that we still haven't scratched the surface yet.
No, I know people keep telling me it's about time I wrote this book, but
I was going to ask you about writing a book.
My trouble is I love talking about these things, and I could put I can write pretty good prose, but I don't enjoy it as much as just sitting down and having a chat with friends.
Yeah.
Maybe what I need is a friend to follow me around and make notes.
Definitely, yeah.
Personal assistant, I think, is what they call them. But no, there's still so much to do. So we'll 100% get you back on at some stage to continue.
Yeah, Visitors International want me back next week.
Next week, yeah. We've got plans next week, unfortunately. But we'll not leave it so long next time to get you back on and continue the chat and stuff. Like I said, there's still so much to go through and stuff. But you've been fantastic as always. Again, this tonight.
It's been absolute pleasure.
It's been fantastic. I enjoyed the first time that we had you on. I've enjoyed this, just as much, if not more. Just being able to kind of have a bit of a giggle with you and just hearing your stories and stuff that we didn't hear from before. So, yeah, and everyone's loved it. So, yeah, massive thank you to yourself. And like I said, we won't leave it so long next time.
Yeah, let's do that.
We'll give you a bit of a break, if something to happen and things like that. But yeah, 100%. I mean, Jim Gemmell Sims just posted there. You could listen to you for hours. I think we all could. So. Yeah, definitely a big thank you to you. So let's just have a quick recap as to what we're doing here. So you can see behind me there's the spinny wheel of destiny, which still needs a name.
I think it should be the P factor.
The P factor. No, the T factor.
No, the P factor.
Oh, the P factor.
Yeah,
Okay.
the P factor is the thing that makes the right-hand side of a propeller pull harder than the left-hand side of a propeller.
P factor. Very okay. I'm gonna keep that for I might consider that actually, the P factor. Time to bring out the P factor. I like it. It sounds good. But so that needs a name. If you want to, and I'm going to just point this out now. If you want to follow Kat on her socials, they're now on the screen below. Twitter and Facebook are what you use the most, so these would probably be the best things to find you on, and that you're not scared about having a chat with people if they want to know anything about you or anything else.
Good heavens, no! And as long as the person that's asking to add me as a friend has a full and believable profile,
yes,
I'm good at filtering out these people who say they're in the U.S. Army and they come from Kansas and lived in Kansas, but can't string two words together in English together. So the ones that are definitely the scammers, I'm usually pretty good at filtering out. But most people I'll happily add as a friend, and if we don't get on in a week or so, then they'll get deleted. No, anybody from tonight who hits me up on Facebook or Twitter, they're going to get a yes. So
yeah, fantastic. There you go. If you need an incentive, you've just had it. So there you go. Wonderful stuff. So let's jump on very quickly to next week so we can point out what we're doing next week. Quite an interesting one next week. We sort of discussed it and we think it's a really good topic to talk about. But next week, we're going to be discussing Laker Airways, which I think needs a lot of attention because I think, as I've put, without them, I don't think low-cost carriers would exist. So we're going to be talking a lot about Laker Airways. A lot of youngsters that are watching may not know who they are. So I think it's a nice educational show for them as well next week. It's kind of get an idea as to why we've suggested that without Laker Airways, airlines like Ryanair and EasyJet would not exist. So if that's tickling your fancy, do join us next week for that one. But at this time of the evening, we're going to do some shout outs and, eventually say our goodbyes. Now, we pre-warned Kat about this, so hopefully she's prepared. But we're going to let Kat do some shout outs first.
Gosh, I haven't prepared
she's
it.
Yeah, it's that time already.
I mean, the shout outs I'd certainly like to give are to the people that have pitched up tonight from my list of friends, people like Henry Fox and Samantha that we talked about earlier on with Luke, and Jane Harkis is now on my friend list. We've connected up on Facebook while we were on air tonight. All of those people and people from the Tesla owners group like Will Feely, all of those people that came along tonight to support the show.
Absolutely.
And hopefully will have decided that this show is worth coming to regularly.
I hope so.
Thanks to all of you.
Yeah, I hope
and
so.
Of course, all of your regular viewers who've come along tonight. It's been fantastic to see every one of them.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people that watched the show from episode 3 are still with us all this way forward. So Ian was one of them. One of them before he even came onto the show as a contributor. So yeah, he sat there and listened to our show on episode 3 and is now taking part in it. So it just shows how far I guess the show's come. So yeah, yeah, wonderful. Just really nice. Lots of comments coming in saying that everybody loved the show this evening and really enjoyed it. And absolutely fantastic. Fantastic to see. So we'll go on to you, Ian, if you'd like to do your shout outs.
Yeah, just a massive thanks to you, Cat, for tonight's show. It's what is it now? 2.5 hours now. We've been sat here, and we could still go for 2.5 hours, couldn't we? Yeah, I had things myself rolling round inside my head, but I was sat there so engaged listening that everything's just gone. I just sat listening. I was quite happy just being, rather than contributing, being one of the one of the people just listening. It's been fantastic. So so massive thanks to you, Cat. To you as well, Tom. It's a shame that Steve's internet dropped out again. He's having some issues with that internet.
What happens when you mock the Cornish?
That's right. But
I've told him about this.
Yeah, it did actually just send me a little message saying, "Can you promote his Instagram?"
Yeah,
No.
the Pistons have got it.
I don't want to promote his Instagram.
A quick plug. So
no, I will. I will.
Yeah,
I'll do it before we go.
So
I'll do it before we go.
Steve. And a massive thanks to everybody who's been engaged in the chat tonight. A lot of names again, what we haven't seen. A lot of Cat's friends in there as well, and a lot of they've got quite interesting backgrounds as well. A lot of these people with your Tesla owners group, and you do pilots and things like that. So that's fantastic. Yeah, some really, really interesting people in here tonight, and obviously Ken as well at Visions International, and everybody else who's been listening tonight and joining in. It's been fantastic. So,
brilliant. Yeah, I'll quickly do a few shout outs here. So firstly to Cat, for, like I say, people have loved tonight, and you're always very informative from whenever, from the first show that we spoke about everything to now. It's always just been very informative, and people have been so engaged that they're just sitting there like, but not in a bad way. It's like literally just listening to
just start listening.
And it's fantastic. Like, really, really cool to hear a perspective from sort of, somebody like well established like yourself, that's been there, done it all, and things like that. It's just really nice for people to hear your stories as well. So a big thank you as well, like I said, for sparing this evening for us. Didn't realize this was going to go on this long, but but a big thank you anyway for doing that for us for this evening. Also, a big thank you to Ian, who has stuck around. I don't know if you had things to do or not, but
no, not really.
Well done for contributing. Steve, well done for leaving us, and everybody that's been in the chat, like Ken Carr, Gail Leary, Sarah Pass, Jim Gamble. I can go on. Leslie White, Jane Harkers, Josh Cunningham, all of your friends, of course, Henry Fox, Samantha, and I forget the name. Is it Luke?
Luke, yeah.
Luke, yeah, big shout out to Luke for his accomplishments. So big shout out to him. Matthew Harris, literally so many names I can mention. So big thank you to everybody that's watching. If it's your first time viewing this podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel at The Departure Lounge. Not only do we do podcasts, but we do aircraft compilations as well, and of course trips to Kemble and all these things. So it's worth checking out. Definitely worth checking out. So if you subscribe, big thank you to that. And of course, lastly, the last shout out, of course, always to healthcare workers and key workers from around the world during this very difficult time that we're going through. It's still getting difficult, even though things look like they're back to normal. It's still very, very difficult. So, big shout out to you. And of course, a big thank you to Ken and Sarah for allowing us to stream once again on their channels and to spread this podcast within the aviation community. So big thank you to you. So as we said, next week we are doing Laker Airways. Should be an interesting show. 7:30 p.m. Next Wednesday should be a very fun show. But for now, we are going to say our goodbyes. So Ian, if you'd like to say your goodbyes first.
Yeah. So thanks again, everybody, for listening.
No, we're not. Not yet, because I didn't follow up on my promise about Steve. There's Steve's Instagram. If you want if you want to follow him on Instagram, there you go. I know he's still watching, but there it is.
Yeah.
And also, you can follow Ian as well if you fancy it. And if you want to keep up to date with the channel and what's happening, you can find myself on Twitter. We have also a Facebook page. If you want to see some wonderful retro photos from myself back from like 2010 backwards, find me on Instagram.
Too many of these social media things now, isn't there?
Far too many. Anyway, let's say our goodbyes and get out of here for another week. So, Ian, now you can say your goodbyes.
Right. There's just a quick comment there from Visions International asking where Steve is. Well, Steve, unfortunately, Ken, his internet dropped out, but he has messaged me and he's asked me to say, "Good night, my lovelies." So he's asked me to do it in that voice. So there you go. And I'll just say thanks to everybody who's been in the chat tonight in a northern accent, and see you all next week.
Fantastic. See you next week. Cat, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh,
We'll keep in touch as we always do. But if you'd like to say goodbye to those that are still watching.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure all evening, and watching the chat disappear past and seeing some of the questions coming up and just some of the comments coming up have been fantastic. It's lovely to have an audience with whom you can engage.
Absolutely.
And for me, I'm all about audience and about talking to the people I'm with, not about necessarily covering the same ground or covering any particular ground. And tonight has just been lovely from that point of view. It's been a truly engaged audience, and I thank every one of you.
Wonderful. So I'm sure we'll see you around at some stage, no doubt.
Absolutely.
A lot sooner than 53 episodes later.
Yeah, let's do that. Definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely. But for now, look after yourself, take care, and we'll see you at some stage.
Thanks very much, Tom. Good night to every one of you. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Fantastic. And of course, everyone's still watching. Next Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. is when we're next live. So for now, look after yourselves. Stay safe. Have a fantastic rest of the week. Have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next Wednesday for the next show. Take care, everybody. See you later. Bye.